Okay, here we go. So this is the full set review for the purposes of draft for Murders at Karlov Manor. The set is a doozy. I will go through the system that I'm using to rate everything, an overview of the whole set, all the mechanics, everything that you'll need to get started. Then we will go through every single card in the set one at a time. So I use a slightly different system than most people, and I have revised it a little bit if you were here since LCI. So everything is on a scale of 1 to 10, and they're a little color coded now. So a 1 to 3 is a card that you want to try and replace. A 4 to 6 is a card that is fine, it's your meat and bones. A 7 to 9 is something very strong, and a 10 is very rare. Since last time, I have removed the old 9. So a 9 was a card you would always play, a 10 was a card that won the game, but we never had any 10s, so there wasn't that much of a point. So the end result is that everything has been bumped up roughly half of a rank. Really, it means that I can spread out the replaceable cards a little bit more. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 1 is a card you should never play. A 2 is a card you should do your best not to play. A 3 is a replaceable card. It's something that you should try to find an alternative for. A 4 is a strong card. A 5 is a card that you will always play in its given deck or archetype. A 6 is a card you will always play in a given color. Something that's just strong regardless of the cards around it. 7 is a reason to play that deck or archetype. It's something that pulls you in. And 8 is a card you will do some work to play in, something you will to play that card. You will splash, you will maybe play other worse cards to make that card playable. A 9 is a reason to be in a color. You see that card in a pack, you go into that color, it is powerful, it is a bomb. Something like Aclazotz in the last set, if you open an Aclazotz pack 3 or a Gruff Triplets pack 2 and Wilds of Eldraine, you are now black and green respectively. A 10 is a card you will always play no matter what. They're very rare. I have not found one in this set, but I haven't looked at all the rares yet. So the biggest difference between my review system and other people's review systems is that I have a floor and ceiling system. So a floor is the worst a card will be, a ceiling is the best a card will be, and then everything has an effort value. That is the difficulty required to bring a card from its floor to its ceiling. So like there are going to be some cards that are very hard to make work, but it might be worth it if it's got a high difficulty and you can get it up to a 9 or a 10, it's worth putting in the effort. If it's got a high difficulty and you can only ever get it up to a 3 or a 4, it's probably not worth the effort. And then some of that is going to include play situations, cards that you can only use in a specific situation, and some of that is going to include cards that you really need to put the deck building work into, and sometimes that's going to be worth it. Just for today's stream, this is the only stream that I do specifically for the purposes of recording. That means I have some of the alerts off, and I only look at the chat between slides. So if you're talking right now and I haven't answered you, I do apologize. When we get to the rest of the cards, I promise I will answer all the questions. I will also take criticisms and arguments on these cards. So if you think I'm wrong, tell me, and either I will convince you, you will convince me, or we will agree to disagree. This is specifically for the purposes of drafting. So cards will have its general score is likely going to be the pack 1 pick 1 score, and then I will give you the situations where it will work. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and look at the chat. Hi. Okay. So sorry. Yes, we do have power creep. Yes, the theming is really good here. Thank you. I do like this hat. Hi Foxy, how's it going? It's going to be a good day. Okay, so Karlov Manor is the very first set we have had that is being held with play boosters rather than draft boosters. Things aren't going to be that different. So basically, it's changing the structure of what a pack is. So rather than have a slot that's always a common, a slot that's always uncommon, a slot that's always a rare, and a slot that's always foil, and then dedicated additional slots for random things, there's a lot of slots that can be random things. So like there's a slot that can be foil, there's a slot that can be any card in the set. So like pack can have 2 rares or 2 uncommons. And there's a slot that can be a list or guest card. So a guest card is something with different art theme to the set. A list card is just a reprint of an existing card, like Ixodor Reality Sculptor on the right here from Onslaught, one of my favorite older cards. It's not going to affect your draft that much. The biggest change is that there's more uncommons per set. Yes. So The biggest cards, only about 1 in 8 packs has a guest or list card, which is why they're a little less impactful. The cards are slightly different on Arena versus in paper. The ones that are most impactful for this set is 1 in 8 packs has one of roughly I think it's like 35 cards. There's 10 guest cards and like 25 list cards. The ones that matter the most are Tireless Tracker, Sir Conrad, Ixidor, and Deathcloud. And they don't actually, none of these cards matter that much for what your opponent is doing. However, if you open an Ixidor, your face down cards are a little bit better. Tireless Tracker is a card you should probably always play. They're so rare. Like, the fact that they'll show up is fine. They're mostly just normal cards. They're not huge impact stuff. And the fact that they're so rare means that you don't have to worry too much about them. But Ixidor is cool in this set. They thought about this. Like, if you go and look at the list of cards on the list and the list of the guest cards, they really, compared to like the previous list, there's nothing that breaks the game in these packs. There's nothing that ruins the format. You do have one fewer card per pack, but that doesn't matter. And we'll talk a lot about why that doesn't matter over the course of this set review. All right. So first, we're going to go over the mechanics of the set. It's mostly new ones. There's a few returning ones. Up first, we've got Disguise. The Disguise is just Morph, which if you've followed me for a while, you know that Morph is my favorite MTG mechanic. Disguise is, you play it face down as a 2/2 creature with Ward 2. The Ward 2 is the new text. And then you can turn it face up for its Disguise cost. It's an alternative cost. Compared to Morph in Khans of Tarkir, or even like Legion's Onslaught way back in the day, very few cards care about disguised cards. Rather, Disguise is sort of its own mechanic. It's still very influential on the set because it is this set's form of alternative costs. So a few cards are like, so usually when a card cares about Disguise, it says things like, whenever a card is turned face up, do a thing. So most of the cards in this set, whenever Vengeful Creature is turned face up, destroy target artifact or an enchantment an opponent controls. There aren't a lot of cards that say whenever another creature is turned face up, or whenever another creature is turned face down, or for each face down creature. Rather, the impact Disguise is going to have on this set is making it so that nobody will ever miss a 3-drop. People will always have something to do on 3 mana. And giving things alternate costs. So this Vengeful Creeper is a lot better than a generic 5 mana 5/5 because it's like a split card. It is either a 5 mana 5/5 or a 3 mana 2/2. And that makes all of these more expensive cards a little bit better because they don't get stuck in your hand. You can have a deck of mostly expensive creatures and 2-drops and then play them for 3 mana instead. So out of the Disguise cards, they're spread pretty evenly across every color. Only a few cards care about cards that have Disguise or that flip face up. The biggest difference between this and some of the other sets is like when we had Morph in the past, it would be a 3 mana face down 2/2, and then you flip it face up into a 10/10 or a 4/4 or a 1/4. Most cards with Disguise change into things with the same toughness. So it is a lot harder to get blown out by dealing 3 damage to a creature and having it flip up into 4 toughness. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but it's not going to happen as much as in other Morph sets. Only a few cards gain toughness for less than 5 mana. Most of the cards that gain toughness have 5 mana, so you can safely kill most creatures if your opponent only has 2 mana up, and if they have 5 or 6 mana up, you might need to wait a bit to play your removal spells. 7 of the Disguise creatures gain Flying or Reach, which means that if you have a cheap flyer and you're attacking, you got to be a little bit wary of what your opponent's Disguise creatures are. And we have a few notable absences compared to other sets. There is no creature that turns face up to grant a different creature Reach or Flying or Trample. There's no creature that turns face up and grants Recursion. There's no creature that turns face up and grants a different creature Toughness. There is a few creatures that untap themselves and grant themselves Flying. There's no creature that kills a creature. There's nothing that's like, when this creature turns face up, destroy target creature. When this creature turns face up, deal 5 damage to target creature. There is one creature that turns face up to bounce a creature. but it's going to play differently. You care more about the disguised creatures for what they are themselves and what they do to themselves, which is very cool in this set because it makes things feel more alone. The creatures are more alone and independent. And deducing what they are, figuring out which creature is face down by how your opponent has been playing this game is a huge advantage. It's better than it's been. Undisguised works. Face up works. Yes, that is true, Thane. They really designed disguise carefully in this set. The other mechanic in this set regarding disguise is called Cloak. It doesn't come up very often. It's a pretty rare one. Cloak disguises other creatures. So you can turn down a creature that doesn't have disguise and it'll turn face up for its mana cost. It's functionally disguise. It's only got a different name because if your opponent has a face down disguised creature that doesn't have disguise, they lose the game. If your opponent has a face down cloaked creature that doesn't have disguise, that's fine. All right. Investigate. So investigate is a returning mechanic. If you haven't played with investigate before, investigate is a format warping mechanic. It changes the entire format. So 38 cards in this set have investigate. But in addition to that, there are 11 and a few rares cards that care about having artifacts in play or sacrificing that. What this does to the overall format is drastically increases the number of cards that are worth 2 cards. Like here's a great example, Persuasive Interrogators is a 6 mana 5/6. When it comes into play, investigate. Yeah, the text on the bottom is great. We'll talk about that when we review that card. But on its surface, this is a 6 mana 5/6 that you can later crack that clue to draw a card. Of what this does is make time over the course of the game equal to cards. Because if you're playing trading cards back and forth, and you suddenly find yourself with an empty board and 6 mana, you can probably turn that 6 mana into cards. If you find yourself behind on mana and you're playing a 4-drop on turn 6, you can crack a clue. It doesn't feel hugely impactful until you play with it and you realize that it's turn 8 and you still have 5 cards in hand, or it's turn 12 and you still have 2 cards in hand, and so does your opponent. It also generates mana sinks inherently. So like in LCI or in Wilds of Eldraine, we are constantly looking for things to do with our mana late in the game because cracking a food to gain 3 life was not necessarily that impactful. You don't have to worry about that so much in this set because so many of your late game turns are going to be spent flipping your disguised creatures face up and cracking clues. Card advantage ends up being somewhat inherent, and so do mana sinks. So things that like just destroy target creature, things that make an answer 1 for 1 are a little less powerful in this set. All right, the other mechanics we'll be looking at are cases. So cases are a little bit like sagas in that they are enchantments that progress. Most of them do something powerful when they come into play. Don't worry too much about cases themselves. There's only one card that cares about cases. For the most part, cases are going to be evaluated separately as we get to them, case by case. There's also Suspect, which is only in red and black and a little bit in blue, and then other cards interact with it. When you suspect a creature, it can't block and has menace. So you can suspect your own creature to make them attack better, or you can suspect your opposing creature to make them unable to block. It's an inherently aggressive mechanic. So because you can suspect your opponent's creatures to turn off blockers, or your own creatures to make them harder to block. It is mainly in the red-black color pair, and there's lots of cards that care about it, but it is worth looking at when we get there to the red-black color pair. And then there's collect evidence. So to collect evidence, if you collect evidence 4, that means you need to exile cards with total mana value 4 or greater from your graveyard. It's mostly in blue-green and a little bit in black, and it is an inherent use for your graveyard. It is a great card, or a great mechanic in general, but it doesn't have a lot to do other than with itself. And then in blue-green, the cards care most about collecting evidence itself. Like the act of collecting evidence is what generates stuff. In black-green, the cards care about creatures leaving the graveyard. So collecting evidence is a good enabler for that. And we will talk about all of those mechanics as we get to their cards. Things bleed a lot into other colors and archetypes. All right, stats. There's 100 creatures. Oh, and thank you so much, Imperial Lion. I couldn't have done this without you this time. There's 100 creatures. They're not all literal creatures. There's some that like generate tokens or are sorceries that make a token, or are only ward creatures. You can overpay collecting evidence, Lion, but there's not a lot of reason to do that, mainly because there are cards that care about your opponent's graveyard that you can play around by collecting extra evidence. But most of the things that care about creatures leaving the graveyard say whenever one or more, so you don't gain anything for making additional creatures leave. All right, there's 100 creatures. 22 of them have flying, which is 8 more than LCI. 8 more creatures have flying. 2 more creatures have reach, for his total 6 reach creatures. There's 15 combat tricks in this set, and this is the weirdest combat tricks have ever been. There's very few cards that just make your creatures bigger. There are 6 pieces of colorless fixing, 4 of which are lands, 2 of which are artifacts, and 4 pieces of green fixing. There's less incidental fixing, so you have to look for fixing. If you are running more than 2 colors, you're going to need to try to get fixing. There's like 0 treasures, there's 0 cards that randomly get an extra land. And then there are 10 dual lands at rare, which you will find very useful. But there's 21 creatures with 1 toughness, 36 creatures with 2 toughness, not counting every creature in the set with disguise. 30 creatures with 3 toughness, 32 creatures with 4 toughness, 11 creatures with 5 toughness, 6 creatures with 6 toughness, 1 creature with 7 toughness, and 2 creatures with 8 or more toughness. I did include rares in the toughness counts. I did not include list and guest cards. Removal. There for the first time, I think this is the very first time, I was very careful. There are 0 spells that deal 1 damage. There's no deal 1 damage to every creature. There's no deal 1 damage to 10 creatures. There's no deal 5 damage divided out. There are some sweepers. We'll talk about them later. There are only 15% of the creatures have 1 toughness. That's a little lower than usual, meaning the creatures tend to be a little bigger than usual. There are a lot of things that make Thopters at instant speed to block. That's the only thing that counts. There are 2 cards that deal 2 damage, which will kill 41% creatures, plus all of the disguised creatures. Then 3 cards that deal 3 damage. That kills 62% of the creatures. There's 2 cards that deal 4 damage. That kills 85% of creatures. So I have 1.5 cards, that deal 5 damage to creatures. Because one of them you have to deals 5 damage if you sacrifice an artifact, and one of them kind of weird. We'll talk about it later. And then there's 2 things that deal X damage. There's a lot of unconditional removal. There are a few cards that there's 1 card that destroys a creature with mana value 3 or less, and there's another card that destroys a creature with power 4 or greater. There are 4 aura-based removal spells. There's 2 bites. There's 0 fights in this set. There's no deal damage to our creature, deals damage to you, which I think is indicative of the kind of power level we have of the set. This is incorrect. I need to fix this. So I'll fix this when I do the article. Sorry. I don't know why I pasted the wrong one in. So shape of the format. So this is a weird set. Yeah, there's no fights. I'm so sorry about the previous slide. I pasted in the wrong information, and I will fix that next time. But we're just gonna keep going. So this is a weird format. Things are conditional, but differently so. Things have disguise, which means that there's 83 creatures with ward 2. Makes cards like shock is 1 mana, deal 2 damage. It becomes 3 mana if you have to shock a face down creature. You have to ask yourself some questions as you're drafting, but this set, for the first time in a long time, is going to be easier to draft than it is to play. It is a harder to play set than it is to draft. There we go. And I can't remember the last time that happened. So I have some examples, just things I want to talk about. What you need to think about while you're drafting is, where is your mana going and how are you generating cards? You don't have to think about this from the beginning. If you get to pack 2 and you're like, I don't have enough investigate, I don't have enough ways to generate strict card advantage, then start picking them up. Start picking up cards that investigate a little bit higher. You want to know where your mana is going, how you're generating card advantage. how are your opponent's creatures going to change? Like, if you have destroy target creature with, like, there's a destroy target creature mana value 3 or less. If your opponent is going to flip that into something with a mana value of 4, that card's just going to go away. If you are shocking a creature and they flip into a creature with 3 toughness, that card's just going to go away. There are very weird tricks in this format. So, like, expose the culprit is a very cool trick. You can turn target face down creature face up, and then scramble up all your face down creatures, then reblock and flip them up again. There are a lot of, because all the engines had to be designed against clues in terms of card advantage, the engines you can assemble are very powerful. So this chalk outline, whenever one or more creature cards leave the graveyard, you get a 2/2 and investigate. That is worth 2 cards every time a creature leaves the graveyard. But it doesn't do anything if your creatures aren't leaving the graveyard. So pay attention to the restrictions and the types of cards you're using to build your deck. So, like, if you have make your move and not on my watch, then you might need some unconditional removal. If you're trying to clear blockers, then you might need to suspect creatures. Maybe you're suspecting small creatures so that they can't block, using not on my watch to take out the bigger creatures. If they're not attacking with their value thing, you're not going to be able to use not on my watch to kill it. It's a bit of a puzzle, but it's more about, compared to, like, what was the last puzzle set? Wild's Little Drain was a puzzle set. You had to assemble your deck from puzzle pieces. In this set, you care more about figuring out what puzzle your opponent assembled than assembling your own deck. Your play during this format is going to matter more than it has in a long time, and your ability to figure out what your opponent has based on how they've played is going to affect this format a lot. Like, it is a constantly growing and evolving mystery. It's going to be very cool. All right, up first, we have the multicolored cards, and I'm going to need water for this. So, short break, and then we will get started. I'll leave the stats up. Be right back. I need water. And tea. Okay, I'm back. Sorry for the delay. I spilled some tea. Okay. Thank you. I like how the hat always has the same perspective. Okay, so in in the past few sets, we've had one or two signpost uncommons for each color pair. In this set, there are 3 multicolored cards for each set of colors. However, one of them for each color pair is one of these disguise cards with hybrid mana to flip face up. And Ravnica is where we learned about hybrid mana for the first time. The trick with hybrid mana and all of these disguise cards is they're not blue-white, they are white, or they're not blue and white, they are blue or white. So this card will go into a blue deck or a white deck. It doesn't have to be a blue-white card. So I did include them with the multicolored cards because it's nice to have blue-white, the ability to cast it straight up. But for most of them, is going to be just in whichever color you need it. So I gave the Granite Witness a 5 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 6. It doesn't change its toughness when it grows. So, moving this over here for me for a minute for reasons. So it doesn't change its toughness when it grows, but it is a good attacker and it doesn't ever stop attacking. Wait, what? No, why did you go over here? All right, we're good. It doesn't ever stop attacking, and you can get people with that untap or that tap. It's just a good efficient threat in a blue deck or a white deck. So like you can end step flip it face up to tap down a blocker, or you can attack with it and then flip it up to untap one of your blockers. It's not terribly difficult to get this flip face up, and 2 mana is a sweet spot for flipping this up. Good card all around. It can, but you're not going to struggle with playables. So that's something that I should have mentioned earlier. Compared to other sets, the power level, it's not that the power level is higher on individual cards. The power level is consistently higher. Cards go into more decks. There are a few cards that only work in a specific archetype. But like, because you're not going to have issues getting playables, the format is more about getting the right cards for your deck. So it does make it harder to get it for the right deck. But if you are a Tempo Flyers deck, you're going to want this a little bit more, and you're going to end up picking it a little bit higher. That's why the floor ceiling system is so important for this particular set compared to the past few, and why I put so much time into revising it. But yes, this is a solid flyer. It's a good attacker. And it's going to be just a role player as an attacker. It'll trade up, it'll trade down. It won't usually trade down. But being able to play it as a 4-cost 3/2, it'll just come down as a 4-cost 3/2 fairly often, and you're not going to be too upset about it. Vigilance is also relevant. All right, No More Lies. Mana Leak and it exiles. It's only good in the blue-white deck. It is a solid answer to a lot of things on turn 2. It does fall off a bit in the late game, especially because if your opponent casts a disguised creature, like this is one of those things that really rewards deducing what your opponent is doing. Because if your opponent suspects that you have No More Lies, they'll play out their less important disguised creature first. It's best in a harder control deck and in an Azorius deck. I wouldn't splash for it, but I'll run it most of the time when I am in a blue-white deck. It's a solid counterspell, just nothing amazing. Exiling is relevant. I need the tea so I can keep talking. Up next, we've got Private Eye. There are 34 detectives in this set. A lot of them make detective tokens. I gave this an initial score of a 5 and then just kept bumping it up over time as I realized the other detectives in this set. So the floor on this card is it is relevant against evidence. The last one. The floor on this card is a 3-mana 3/3. It's making clues is trivial. It is very easy to make this card attack with a clue or with a draw spell as an unblockable creature. But it's usually going to be 3 mana for 5 power and toughness. It's very good and a reason to be detectives in general. Also, love the flavor text on this card. Just matches the art so well. Hot, 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 hot. Whew. But lovely card all around. All right, up next we've got blue-black, Coerce to Kill. So 5 mana mind control, but it's a 1/1 death touch, is always going to deal with the best and worst creature your opponent has in play. And there's enough crazy abilities that you're pretty happy to have their creature in general. It deals with a lot of the crazy death triggers or turned face up triggers, although usually you don't want to play this on a ward creature because at 7 mana this is just too many. Snatching your opponent's creature is consistently good. I gave it a 7 floor 4 ceiling of 7. It's almost always going to play near that ceiling of 7 unless your opponent just doesn't play a second creature. The other thing is there's not a lot of incidental enchantment removal. You have to be very conscious of killing your opponent's enchantments, and there's not a lot of ways to like blink it. Compared to the other auras, your opponent doesn't even get to sacrifice the creature. Because it's yours. It's on your side of the board. Solid card. It is a controlling card. It doesn't help a lot, or a mid-range card. It does not help you kill them more aggressively. Makes sense for an assassin. Love this card. It's going to be very strong and it's worth splashing. All right, up next, Curious Cadaver. So this card got a lot better because there is no 1 toughness. There's nothing that punishes 1 toughness. There's no like. There's not even like dead weights. And if your opponent uses a shock on this, you're going to be happy because shock kills so many things. You do have to put some work into having some clues. But it's not hard to have clues in this set. It's almost free. If you pick this card up one time, you're happy. But like this is way closer to a 4 mana 3/3 flyer that is unkillable than it should be. I'll be splashing this. I'll be first picking it. If I first pick it, I will prioritize investigate, but like this is very close to your clues have sacrifice, draw 2 cards instead of draw 1 card. Very powerful in this set overall. I gave it a 6. It's got a floor of a 4. That's if you only have a few clues. It's hard to have. It is more difficult to have 0 clues in this set than it is to have 5. The ceiling of an 8, that's in a blue-black control deck with a lot of investigate. Powerful card in general, and one of the reasons that I will often be running 18 lands in this format. There's no way to punish it being a 3/1. There are Thopters. There's no instant or sorcery way to punish it. So if your opponent's making a lot of Thopters, you have to account for that. But it's a bad rate, but I'm even going to be okay blocking a Thopter with this and then picking it up often. Very powerful. 4 is a lot to pay each time, Lion. But what do you want to get? What is worth 4 mana to you? Because for me, a 4 mana 3/1 isn't worth it to me for 4 mana in a lot of sets. In this set, and in most sets, a 4 mana 3/3 is worth it to me. This is much closer to a 4 mana 3/3 than a 4 mana 3/1. And you're actually pretty happy to trade this. Like, so often this is going to trade with a disguised creature, and you're happy if it trades with a disguised creature. It's not free. Like 4 mana does matter here, but you're not upset playing this. Like this is a 7-turn recursive clock. Yes. All right, up next, Fairy Snoop. Oop. So this card is one of the. So this is a cycle. There's a bunch of creatures that flip up for Guild 1, or Guild. Fairy Snoop, I gave a 6 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 7. Because it is the only creature that gets to jump to 4 toughness for 3 or less mana. It's the only disguised creature. So like you play it face down for 3. 99% of the creatures in this format, and that's not true. A lot of the creatures in this format, you're going to feel fairly safe lightning helixing. The existence of Fairy Snoop in your deck means that your opponent has to think about wasting their shock or lightning helix on every disguised creature in your whole deck. I'm pretty sure every blue or black deck wants this card. 4 is the sweet spot. 4 is the sweet spot for a lot of creatures, or for a lot of removal spells, just for surviving it. And suddenly flipping face up and having 4 toughness is huge. That's a huge boost in this format. 2 more toughness is incredibly difficult to get. That floor of a 4, that's if you are flipping it face up as a creature that draws a card. You will often get 3 cards out of this Fairy Snoop. If you can blank one of your opponent's pump spells or one of their removal spells by flipping it face up, and you get to draw a card, and it puts a card into your graveyard for collecting evidence. And it is itself a detective. It just does everything. This is one of the better commons in the set, and you should pick it very highly. Yeah, it's very good. So it's one of the only disguised creatures that gains toughness for under 5 mana. It's just very, very good. You can almost see how they tried to design it as blue, black, and they're like, this was too powerful for just 2 mana. Yes. So ward is a triggered ability, Ninja, which means you can always flip it face up after the ward is paid. And you always should. I guess you could flip it up before the ward is paid. After the trigger's on the stack. I cannot think of a scenario where you would want to. All right, up next, we've got Black-Red, Deadly Complication. This is the card I revised the most. For some reason, 3-mana Destroy Target Creature is just not great in this set. It is fantastic in Black-Red Suspect, because controlling if your creature is suspected and growing a creature is very good. One counter makes a big difference in this format. Growing a creature a little bit makes a big difference in this format, because like your 3/3 with Ward 2 attacks into their 2/2 with Ward 2. When so many creatures' sizes are standardized, a +1/+1 counter really matters. And you'll still play this in your Black-Red deck. It's only got a 4 because I won't often go into Black-Red for this card. You're going to have to weigh this card against Murder a lot. Murder is black, colorless, destroy target creature at instant speed. Being at instant speed is much more important in this format because of the power of the tricks. I mean, the card's solid. A 4 is a card, like a 4 is a strong. 4 is strong. You'll still play it, but you won't necessarily abandon what you're doing if you see this. Like, it's still a good card. It kills anything. But in a set where if your opponent plays a creature that investigates, and then plays a creature that investigates, and then plays a creature that collects evidence, then your 3-mana removal spell is going to look really bad. There's so many 2-for-1s in this set, it ends up being a little bit difficult. You're okay. The +1/+1 counter Ninja does stay after it flips. The creature is still the same creature, it's just been revealed. Haiku, thanks so much for the sub. I really appreciate it. See, that's the thing, Lion. I don't think I do always play this in Black-Red. Like, I will usually play this in Black-Red, but compared to other formats, I might cut this card. That is how weird the removal is in this set. Like, you don't have to kill. Against red-green, you'll probably need to kill all the creatures. Against green-blue, you probably don't. Like, we'll talk about it more. But this is a weird one. Like, I won't always be playing Murder in this set. I expect this will be like Neon Dynasty. You do need removal, but so many of your opponent's cards are worth 2 or 3 cards that if you are just answering their threats without deploying your own, you're going to lose the game. All right, Runebrand Juggler. Now here is the removal that you want. This is the removal you will take. That's a very good question. I think it's like probably a quarter of the card. I think it's a 1.25 for 1, but it does deal with the best thing your opponent is doing. But like you'll usually play this in Black-Red, but it's not as good as it looks. All right, Runebrand Jungler. So a 2-mana 2/2 is great. You get to decide. So it's a 2-mana 2. Like, I gave it a 6, floor 5, ceiling of 8. It's a 2-mana 2/2. You can have it suspect itself to be a turn 2 2/2 with menace that can't block. Or you can give a different creature menace and can't block. Let's say you have a 1-drop with Runebrand Juggler. You make that creature menace, and then on turn 5 you get to kill a creature. This is like a very powerful card if you only have one other creature to throw. You get to throw a creature with that 5-mana ability at instant speed, at anything to kill it. And you can continue to suspect new creatures and throw those as well. This is a good sack outlet and a powerful card for the suspect deck in general. I will often first pick this when I want to be an aggressive suspect deck, but this is where you this is the card that lets your suspect deck pivot into being something more mid-rangey. Like, it's a great aggressive card, but you can also start turning every suspected creature into something, into a removal spell. Very powerful. Up next, we've got Shady Informant. This is a pretty cool card. It's not very powerful. Compared to the other dual-costed cards, you don't just cram this into any black or any red deck. It's kind of weak on its surface because your opponent can time the killing of it. So, like, in other formats, this might have been pretty good, but the fact that your opponent can time the killing of it to when they're tapped out so that you can't kill their warded disguised creature makes it a little bit weaker. However, if you can suspect this card and give it a 4-2, turn it into a 4-2 menace, then suddenly it gets really hard to block. You can also suspect it while it's face down, attack it, they'll block it because it's got menace with their 2/2/2s, and you can kill 3 2/2s by flipping this face up. So it's not like the best card, but it does have a place. And so I gave it a 3 with a floor of a 2 and a ceiling of 5. And that ceiling, like, this is not a reason to go into the suspect deck. But if you are the suspect deck, the Shady Informant is a fine card in it. Yes, 5 is 93% of creatures. We can go check. That's the other -5/-5 that I wanted to talk about. This one. Yeah, 5 is 93% of all the creatures in the set. And that's the other 75% of 1.5, 5 damage removal. I think this set feels really deep. Like, the design things that we're picking up, yes, you can block and then flip. Like, it is a difficult 2-for-1. So the card I wanted to compare it to was the Crawler in the last set, the 5 mana 5/2 that when it dies discover 3. Like, you will always get a card out of this, and you can try and get 2 cards out of it, but it's tough. And it can always burn your opponent. Like, it's just a little overcosted for what it does, because you don't want to pay 5 mana for a 4/2 that deals 2 when it dies, or 7 mana for a 4/2 that deals 2 when it dies. So you have to use the fact that it's disguised to generate a card, which is more work than you usually have to put into cards in this set. But if you pick it up late, or if you move into black-red late, you can play this in your black-red deck and you won't be too upset about it. Up next, we've got Breakout. So, it's like Half a Collected Company. This is really a constructed card. It is worth including if you have enough rare bombs, especially if those rare bombs cost 2 mana. Like, getting to look at 6 cards is nice. That is a lot of your deck, if you have bombs to dig for, but it's not worth it otherwise. It's not worth the second color, and you can whiff on it. Yeah, see, this set is awesome, Lion, because, like, this is a bad card that I'm really excited both to talk about and play with. That's fantastic design. Like, I gave it a 3. I'm still going to put this card into my deck sometimes and not be too upset about it. Like, the rating almost ends up being more about the work you have to put in to make a card good in this set. In fact, we're upping the effort value. Yeah, I like that. Exactly, Fina. This set's really cool. Like, everything you have to do in this set to get the most out of your cards is a puzzle. I'm so excited for it. So Breakout, you can go get a card with mana value 2 or less and put it on the battlefield and it's got haste. That's fine, but, like, it's very random. It's good if you are red-green and have bombs. I don't know how many. I haven't looked at all the rares yet, so I don't actually know how good it is. I want it to be good. But yeah. Oh, there's a golem here if anybody wants it for Pokemon. All right, Riftburst Hellion. All right, back in Khans of Tarkir, there was a card called Woolly Loxodon. It had Morph. It turned into a 6/7, and it was important as the threshold for how big a creature could be. That's what Riftburst Hellion is in this set. Riftburst Hellion is your threshold. You always have to be aware that if your opponent has 6 mana, they can hit you for 6 damage. And if your opponent has 6 mana, they can block and kill your 6/6 flyer. That threshold makes this card worth including, at least in one copy. And it makes it good if you are ramping. Um, it's better than a 7 mana 6/7 because if you have 3 copies of Riftburst Hellion in your hand and 3 mana, you still have things you can do with your mana. You just don't want to be in that situation. So a 4, I gave it a 4. It's usually going to play at a 4 or a 5. It is less splashable than the other disguise creatures. It's like you don't want to play Riftburst Hellion in your red-white battalion deck, your red-white attack with 3 creatures deck. You don't want to play it in your blue-red clues deck unless you are going way into disguise. But like as a red-green beater, it does its job. It doesn't have trample, so you have to get that damage in as a surprise. Your opponent can chump block it forever once it flips face up. But the reach makes it really nice. It means that you can still pull a whole extra card out of it when your opponent attacks with their flyers. And it means that if you have 6 mana, don't crack your clues on your turn. Even if you have a face down, if you have a different creature disguise, if you have something silly like a Shady Informant face down, and your opponent is attacking you, has a 4/4 flyer in play, and you're trying to decide what to do on your turn, and you have 6 mana, pass the turn. Because your opponent is not going to be able to attack their 4/4 flyer into your 6 mana face down creature. Because they won't be able to risk you flipping it up and blocking it and eating it for free and cracking back for 6. Like, this is a very important card for everybody to know, because whether or not you have Riftburst Hellion in your draft pool, in your seal pool, you have to be able to pretend that you have Riftburst Hellion in your draft or sealed pool. Know this card. You're going to have to play around it, and you're going to have to pretend that you have it. Yes. So up next we have 10th Street Gossip. This is the second card that I revised a lot. I gave it a 5 with a floor of a 4 and a ceiling of 7. The thing is, there isn't a single creature that 10th Street Gossip turns up for free, because the red-green hybrid card is Riftburst Hellion. That means that if I go turn 3, there's one. We'll talk about it today. But if I have a turn 3 Deceive creature and a turn 4 10th Street Gossip, then I can't tap 10th Street Gossip to flip that creature up. There might be rares, but I haven't seen all the rares yet. However, a 4 mana 4/4 Vigilance that lets you maybe cast an extra spell, that's good enough most of the time. So that's that floor of a 4. It's usually going to play like a 4. If you are like a dedicated red-green ramp deck, you can get some mana value out of this, but it's not easy. It doesn't have to be easy though. So like I gave it a high effort value, but the floor is pretty high also. So the cool card. I think they kind of really nailed this one. I also love this. Like, it's a 10th Street Gossip. The Law Mages are trying to hush it up, but I'm telling you, the guard didn't fall off that balcony. He was pushed. But he's not like a weaselly, sniveling gossip. He's a big, buff guy. So I like the idea that there's this guy running a stall and he's gossiping and giving people shit. And then someone comes over and is like, "Are you spreading rumors about me?" And he just stands up and he's twice as big and way buffer. I like this card. I like the Viashino in general. Buried in the Garden. So 4 mana for an O-Ring is kind of a lot compared to the other removal we've seen in the set. However, cards are expensive and you have a lot of things to do with your mana, meaning this is usually going to just be worth 2 cards. It's also less fragile than we've seen in other sets. There's no like volatile fault. There's no free way to kill an enchantment. And we will go through a lot of the enchantment removal. I should have mentioned earlier, all of the artifact and enchantment removal in this whole set is found in green and white, which means that if your opponent is blue, red, and black, they can't deal with this card. So I gave it a low effort value. It's usually going to play near that floor of a 5. That's if it's just removal with a little bit of mana. But like on turn 5, you can cast this, deal with the creature, and play another spell, or cast this, deal with the creature, and draw a card by cracking a clue. Like, the more powerful the mana sinks, the better this effect is, and there's very powerful mana sinks in this set. You're not going to run out of things to do with your mana. Crowd Control Warden. This card is big. It's just a big disguise creature. You do have to have other creatures in play for it to be good, but the green-white strategy for this set is kind of go wide. It makes tokens, and it tries to keep its creatures in play. Green and white is good at keeping its creatures alive in this set. This card is still solid because The a 3-mana 2/2 is a bad rate, and a 5-mana 4/4 is a bad rate. But the option to play either of those is pretty valuable. You will play this card as a 5-mana 4/4 a fair amount of the time, and that's fine. And you can make it huge. If you can flip it face down again, you can flip it up, and it'll keep the counters. I don't know that there's a way to flip a card face down that doesn't exile it first, but I'm going to play with this card more than I should, not because it's powerful, but because one of my very favorite things to do in Magic is 3-card Monty. So I am going to be playing this in paper, and I'm going to tell my opponent one of these 5 face-down creatures is a Crowd Control Warden, which means that you have to block the Crowd Control Warden, or you're going to take 9 damage. It's pretty cool in general. Like, it's not that strong. It's going to be kind of a filler disguise creature. It's better than more disguise creatures you have because you need to disguise it. So, Mac, there is a red card that flips face-up creatures face down, but it exiles them first. Yeah, I used to do it on purpose. I would do it with Ixodron. I'd say there's an Ixodron face down, or there's a Student Shapeshifter face down, and I would flip it face up and be an Ixodron. So yeah, this is like a cool staple disguise card. It's not very strong. I gave it a 4 because size matters. Like, if you can get 2 other creatures out, flip it face up, make it be a 6/6, you're pretty happy. Demolish Sentry. This is our very first, and I think the only one we're going to look out for until we get to the rares. Payoffs for disguised creatures. You really do need to be able to flip up 1 creature for this to be good, but there are enough cheap cards that flip face up. Like, let's say I play a turn 2 Somali Sentry, a turn 3 Disguise Creature. Your opponent can no longer block this with 2/2s or attack with 2/2s just because of the threat of activation of you flipping up that face down creature. A 2-mana 1/3 Reach is almost playable without anything else. If you flip up 1 face down permanent, then you're really happy with the size of it, and then it just keeps scaling. If you flip up 1 face down creature with a Somali Sentry in play, then that's a 3/6 for 2. Card is great. I'll be first picking this a lot, more because I love Disguise than because it's powerful on its own. I gave it a 6 with a floor of 4, and that's if you only have like 1 creature to turn face up and maybe you didn't draw it. And that ceiling of a 7 is going to be when you're a dedicated Disguise deck. Okay, up next, Sanguine Savior. This one is going to be a revisit. So I think it's solid. It really depends on how many Thopters people can get to. It ends up playing a lot like Incidental Life Gain, which I don't know that every deck needs, but there's a fair number of rares with payoffs. 2/1 Flyer does get blocked really well. Compared to this stat line in other sets, it's worse than it's been in a while. But being able to give something lifelink in order to get, like, it's like playing Moment of Defiance in Brothers War. Just that one big attacker getting lifelink will put you back in a game that you would otherwise lose. Also, a lot of the controlling decks want this card to just keep attacking. It's never going to be the best card in your deck, but it's going to be a card your deck, pretty much every black deck and every white deck wants. I like this one. It doesn't gain a lot from flipping face up other than giving something lifelink, so like, don't stress about playing it face down. Compared to some of the other disguise cards, you're going to be casting this one just for 3 mana, because a 5-mana 2/1 flying lifelink that gives something else lifelink is not great, but a 3-mana 2/1 flying lifelink, that's a card you're very interested in playing. Oh shit, I hadn't even thought of that, Mac. I haven't considered Constructed at all. This card's really good with Incubate. Yeah, Somali Sentry is very strong. All right, Soul Search. This card got a revisit because I don't know the bombs well enough in this set. I don't know the rares and mythics well enough. But pull a card out of your opponent's hand and exile it is great. There's not a lot of 1 or 0 mana spells you can hit, so it does end up just taking the best card out of their hand, which can be bad late game. But early game, turn 2, the information you get. So in other sets, this card would be a little lower. In this set, the information gained from seeing your opponent's hand is more valuable than it's been in any other set. Like, knowing all their face down creatures are, what instance they have access to is great. You can just take the best card. All right, Wisp Drinker of Vampire. Yeah, I might build a transforming deck of disguise deck in in constructed. Okay, I gave this a 7 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 7. It's almost always going to play near that ceiling. Card is very strong. A 4 mana 2/4 is a great blocker. It dodges most of the natural removal in this set. So like it can't be hit by destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. Can't be hit by 3 damage, by 2 damage. It can't be hit by destroy target creature with mana value 3 or less. And it just drains them every turn. And if you hit it in the late game, you're happy to activate it, and just your opponent can no longer deal with your army. Black White already has a fairly solid go wide theme. Being able to just drain your opponent, not attack, crack your clues is great. Your opponent, like, this is good on offense, but if you have a whole bunch of 1/1 and 2/2 creatures, and your opponent has all these 6/7s and 8/7s, and you have 7 mana, they can't attack. So you sit there and wall them, and then crack clues with the time you gain. The threat of activation prevents their attacks, whether or not you're attacking in the air, and it does include itself. So like you can have pay 7 to make it give itself Death Touch and Lifelink. These games are going to go pretty long, and this is a fantastic way to take advantage of that. That is very true, Fina. Even the bigger creatures, like if you have your Rift Burst Hellions, you can play it face down to drain them, and then flip it face up, and you'll still have a good creature. Like this card rewards a long and grindy game, and you're going to have a lot of those in this set. Speaking of, our first, the Simic multicolored cards are bonkers. They're all amazing. Simic is the early standout best deck, or not Simic. I'm sorry. Is the early standout best deck in the format, and that is just because of these 3 fantastic multicolored cards. I'm sorry, I said Simic. I meant Is It. Look at this thing. Like it's a 4 mana artifact that comes into play and investigates twice. So the blue red for some reason is billed as being the like sneaky disguise deck, and there are a lot of sneaky disguise creatures. But it cares way more about sacrificing artifacts, and is really good at sacrificing artifacts. Like, so this is a 4 mana spell that investigates twice, a little slow, but now every time you crack a clue to draw a card, you also make a Thopter for the rest of the game, and it stacks. If you have multiple Detective Satchels, you make multiple Thopters. Thopters are really good at pecking in. There are also cards that sacrifice Thopters, so you can turn your Thopters into fresh Thopters. Card is very powerful, worth splashing in any blue deck. I don't know if it's worth splashing in any red deck, because a lot of the red decks are too aggressive to need this. But yeah, every blue deck wants this card, and I will splash it. It's really strong. Yeah, like you will see people with a Detective Satchel and 5 Thopters in this format winning the game so often. There's also like this is a set where I would play End the Festivities. I would play deal 1 damage to each creature my opponents control, and there isn't one. There is no way to ping. Card is very good. Oh, they did call it Artifact Sacrifice. Thank you, Lion. Yeah, cards are really good. Next we have Gadget Tactician. This is a card you will play in red or in blue. It's a 4 mana 3/2 that makes a flyer. Very good. Being able to flip it up in a blue or a red deck to make a flyer. Very good. Lots of things care about having multiple bodies. It is a goblin and an artifact on 1 card. We have seen this style of effect perform really well. And this is another one of the reasons that removal is kind of bad. Like if you're a blue-red deck and your opponent is playing with murder, what are they going to do? Like if your opponent has a hand of 3 murders against your blue-red deck, you're excited. You're actively ecstatic that your opponent is trying to kill all of your creatures with murders. Because like what you flip this up, you make a Thopter, they murder it, you make 2 Thopters. Removal's bad against this deck. Yeah, I mean, speaking of which, Gleaming Geardrake, 2 mana 1/1 flyer that investigates, that gets played, period. You play that card if it has none of this bottom text. Like I gave it a 7, it's almost always going to play near that ceiling of a 7 because you always care about having our you always care about making clues. Like your blue-red deck is so good at making clues, and this just grows, and you don't even have to eat the clues for this to be good. If you attack this into your opponent's Thopter with 2 mana up, your opponent can't do anything about that. There's not a lot of ways to punish artifacts in this set outside of green and white either. Like a lot of the removal is like 3 mana to destroy an artifact. Okay, if your opponent pays 3 mana to destroy your Gear Drake after it already made a clue, you're gonna win the game. And or your opponent sacrifices an artifact. Like you still, if your opponent plays an artifact removal spell and you sacrifice an artifact, it still gets the counter. Card is very powerful, really silly. Yes, you can grow it at instant speed. You can grow it as many times a turn as you want. 3-color splashes are very viable, Fina. We are going to be talking about them. I'd say every green deck wants to splash a 3rd color. And we'll talk about that. We're going to cover green today as well. Up next, we are on Golgari. So up first, we have Insidious Roots. Card is a cool build around. It's a lot of work. There's not a lot of plants in this other than Insidious Roots. This is a good basis for a deck with a lot of colors, like green, white, black. Insidious Roots is going to be a thing. The ramp you can get out of the first line of text on Insidious Roots is huge. And you can eventually start collecting enough evidence to make a whole bunch of plants. But it's all difficult. You need to get multiple elements out of this card, and they're all work. You have to work for every little piece of value on this Insidious Roots. But it can be worth it. You can get that ceiling up to an 8. It's a super weird card for draft because it does have diminishing returns on the first bit. Creature tokens you control have make mana. But in the late game, you are pretty happy to trigger this more than once. However, you only get to trigger it once per like evidence collection. And tokens are a green-white thing. Cards leaving graveyards are a black-green thing, but collecting evidence is a blue-green thing. So like these are all based in green, but you sort of have to Frankenstein your green-black deck together out of the cards that were meant for green-blue or green-white. I'm very excited to play with this card. We are going to give this a revisit because it might not be as hard as it looks. If you can get enough value out of the mana that your creature tokens make, I will bump it up. If you can get enough value out of just the plant part and then only use the plants it makes itself for the mana, I'll bump it up. But like this is an intense build around and every piece is going to be work. I'm going to be losing way too many games trying to make this work. And I'm excited to do it. It's a cool card. It is a standard card. Hey, Asparagus. Yes, exactly. Like, yeah, there's some raised deads. There's collecting evidence. There's an artifact we're going to look at in just a minute that triggers this 2 times by itself. Like, I think there's a 5-color green. I think there's a 5-color Golgari deck, which is really cool. Solid all around. And it's almost like in order to balance out how intense the deck building restrictions are on Insidious Roots, the other black-green card we have is Crawl Whipcracker. Just a very push stat-wise card. A 2-mana 3/2 with Reach is playable in this format. Your opponent, every color pair and archetype in this set has a token to kill, even if it's just a clue. If this is a 2-mana 3/2 with Reach that kills a clue, you're happy. Card does a lot of work. I gave it a 6, floor 5, ceiling of 7. It's usually going to play around that 6 or that 7. Like, it's usually just going to be an efficient body worth 2 cards. Ooh, I love that. Asparagus, I used to play... my very first camera match ever was on Return to Ravnica, Theros, Dredge in that standard. Yeah, that's a good point, Fina. I hadn't actually thought of that. Like, it does stop Thopters. It's a 2-drop that stops Thopters. I'm glad that the Crawl are, like, getting some spotlight. All right, up next, we've got the green-black Golgari Disguise card. I like this one. So I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 6. This one is really about the modes because like it's a 3-mana 2/2. But this one compared to the others, you really want to be able to play it as a 4-mana 3/3 Death Touch. Being able to flip it face up, like your modes here are a 3-mana 2/2, a 4-mana 3/3, a 6-mana 3/3 2-for-1. Because flipping it face up should always yield you a card. But 6 mana is a lot. That's a lot of mana. Is pretty good in like the red-green expensive flip-up deck because you need to protect your creatures. Like it does have a place in a lot of decks because green really cares about keeping its creatures alive. It is so important to keep your creatures alive in this set. For greens, green does not function without a creature in play. So Rakish Scoundrel is like a kind of bad way to do it, but you do need it. So yeah, I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 6. Like, this is way more of a green card than anything else. It is more of a green card than a black card, and more of a Golgari card than any single color. Like, you don't get to play it in just any red deck or any blue deck. You play this in green decks. It's best in red green, but it does something in blue green and green white. Cool card. Up next we have red white. Oh, all right. Yeah. Oh my god, it's so classy. It's like plants and a ascot. It's beautiful. Plants and an ascot and one glove. He's so stylish. He is a rakish scoundrel in every sense. Hey Tyrant, it's going great. We're doing our set review. Right. But it's 6 mana. So like it's a lot to pay for that effect. But like I will often run this over a removal spell. I gave it I actually did take a quick peek near the end of this at other people's set reviews. They all like gave this a nothing great. I'll play this card. It's like not something I'm excited to play, but I will play it pretty often. Like I gave it a strong. All right. Dog Walker. This is one of the more powerful disguise cards. So the thing is, Boros's mechanic, the red-white mechanic in the set is Battalion. So they didn't use the keyword, but it's still Battalion. Battalion is do a thing if you're attacking with 3 creatures. This card is 3 creatures on 1 body. And it's comparable to like Ratcatcher. So it's comparable to Ratcatcher out of Wilds of Eldraine. It is a 2 mana 3/1 or a 5 mana 3/1 with 2 1/1s. Oh my god, it's exactly Ratcatcher, except it has Vigilance instead of First Strike and an extra power. So like sometimes the Boros deck, if you have a whole bunch of disguise cards in your hand, you're going to be pretty happy to play this in your Boros deck as a 2 mana 3/1 with Vigilance. But in any other deck, you're going to be pretty happy to just have the 3 bodies. So like if you are a white-blue control deck, this is going to do just fine for you as a 3/1 that trades up with 2 chump blockers. And if you are a very red aggressive deck, so green, all right, just to run down the archetypes really quick. Blue-white control is happy for the 3 bodies. Green-white tokens is happy for the 3 bodies. Red-white, it's best in Boros Battalion because you get 3 bodies out of 1 card. And it's weakest in blue-red, but that's just because it's got competition in blue-red. It does make the tokens tapped. Like you can't attack with them right away, but it's a good end step card to flip up. Also, 2 disguise, I mentioned it briefly before. That's a sweet spot because that is also what it costs to crack a clue. So if you have red up and a clue in play, your opponent doesn't know whether you're going to flip up a creature and suddenly have 5 power on board to trigger your battalion from nothing, or a clue to crack. So yeah, very solid card, really efficient, better than it looks in this set. I gave it a 6 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 6. It's usually going to play pretty close to that ceiling. Yeah, Vigilance on this card is pretty cool too. It'll trade up, but it won't usually survive being flipped, and that's fine. Up next, we got Lightning Helix. Deal 3 to anything, gain 3 life. It keeps you alive. Like, the thing is, this goes into the most aggressive decks because it can target players, clear a blocker. It lets you win a race. It's good in control decks because it buys you time. Kills 62-ish% of the creatures in the format. You don't usually want to pay 4 to hit a disguised creature, but you will, and that's fine. We've seen this before. This is a reprint. Card's great. Take it high if you're red-white. Go into red-white if you see it late. Give it a 6 with a floor of 4, ceiling of 7. We don't have to say too much about this card. It's really glad. Like, it's a cool card in standard too. I'm pretty happy to see Lightning Helix in general, and like I'm glad we see it like every time we're in Ravnica. So like, okay, just as an aside, the first time they printed this, it was too powerful for standard, and they said they regret it. So they were going to bring it back and return to Ravnica block, but they decided that the standard environment couldn't handle Lightning Helix, so we got Warleader's Helix instead. And suddenly, all the cards are better, and Lightning Helix is just fine. Like, it's good. Like, I gave it the same rating. I gave Lightning Helix the same rating as a Dog Walker. But it's still a great card. You should still take it. So it's been in the Ravnica sets, but it hasn't been in actual Ravnicas. So like they did like a Angels versus Demons thing, or wait, Might versus, I don't remember. No, but Lightning Helix isn't. They did Warleader's Helix in Return to Ravnica. Yeah, sorry, Tyrant. Meddling Youths. We have the Scooby-Doo gang. I like how they gave us some violent youths here. Card's just very good. So the Boros thing is when you attack with three or more creatures, you investigate. So you make a clue. It's gonna be worth splashing in the blue-red deck for that clue. But the thing is, compared to a lot of the other battalion cards, this one gets to be a surprise. Like, it works well with your other battalion cards. You can surprise people by suddenly having battalion even though you only had 2 creatures in play and attacking with 3 at once. But a 4/5 with haste is also just a good stat line in this. It's kind of tough to deal with. Additionally, in this set, so like you might have watched me play LCI, and I would pass a good 4-drop for a mediocre 2-drop because the 4 and 5 drops had a lot of competition. That's not the case in this set. There are only a few good 5-drops in red and white. Meddling Youth does not have the same competition as it would in other sets. I think it's 4 or 5 drops, and some of them are like, none of them are quite this good. All right, up next we've got Evidence Examiner. So this is the Simic card. This is like our Simic signpost. So you can collect evidence, and whenever you collect evidence, investigate. So you don't have to do, like, these are separate lines. You do not have to collect evidence this way, and in fact, you often might not want to. But like a 2-mana 2/2 that investigates 1 time, that's powerful. That's worth it. It is the detective and it is a merfolk. If you can investigate a few times, then this card is really strong. And there are cards that collect. The blue-green collect evidence deck is powerful. This also works well with like Insidious Roots and cards that care about creatures leaving the graveyard. I gave it a 6 with a floor of 5. That floor of 5, even if you're not collecting evidence on the turn it comes out, your opponent has to deal with this because they can't make you discard cards or kill a 4-drop if they're worried about you investigating with this card. 2-mana 2/2 is just really efficient. Yeah, that's true, Fina. Like, being able to hold up a Helix and flip up your Morph is really powerful. How often do you have to collect evidence with this card to be happy line? Because if you collect evidence with your 2-drop 1 time, that's good enough. Like, a 2-mana 2/2 that investigates, you play that 100% of the time. You will always play a 2-mana 2/2 that investigates. This has the potential to investigate 3 times. If this investigates 3 times, then your 2-mana 2/2 just drew you 3 cards. Alright, up next, we've got a really cool one. Repulsive Mutation. Blow my nose, 1 sec. Okay. So, there's a lot going for this card. Going on in this card. You want to say it's a combat trick, but it's a combat trick. Oh, I misread this card. Counter up to 1 target spell. This is better than I thought, and also less difficult to use than I thought. So I thought it said counter target spell, which meant you couldn't play it unless another spell was on the stack. But since it's up to 1 target spell, it's getting a bump up. Because the ability to, if you get to counter a spell, yeah, this is really cool. If you get to counter a spell and put 1 counter on a creature, you're happy. You don't have to pay the X for this to be a counter spell. You just have to have a creature in play. Okay, what happened? Why can we see the white now? Alright. If you counter 1 spell with this card and get 1 counter out of it, then you're happy. But you can counter spell and put 5 counters on a thing. We've already talked about how you'll be leaving mana up a reasonable amount of the time. And this is a late game format. Like, you will often pay 8 mana, put 6 counters on something, even if your opponent doesn't have a card for you to counter. Wow, this is so much better than I thought. The fact that this is up to 1 target spell, meaning there doesn't have to be a spell on the stack for you to play this as a combat trick, makes it so much easier to use. I like it. Like, blue-green feels good in this format. They gave it its own... Blue-green does feel like it has its own identity in this format. But I like this card a lot. I'm just buying this card now. So, like, being able to pay 6 mana and then your opponent can't counters it unless it this will always be able to counter the spell, and it counters it outright. You just have to have a creature in play. So if you have a 6/6, you can pay 2 mana and counter a 6 mana spell. And if you have a 2/2, you can pay 8 mana and counter an 8 mana spell. Card's very cool. Yeah. Like, it's just worth a gift basket. Good job. I got the rundown from Thane before this about the story, and I like kind of nice hearing where the prime speakers are now. All right, up next we have Undercover Crocodile, which, goddamn, like, I feel like someone snuck something past. Wait, why? I don't know what changed. It's fine. Oh, it counters anything. For some reason, I thought it countered mana value. Wow, I had to read this card like 6 times, I guess. But yes, it does. You don't have to target a spell. There doesn't have to be a spell on the stack for you to grow a creature with repulsive. All right, Undercover Crocodile. I feel like somebody wrote Delph on this, and then after they saw the art, and then managed to trick wizards to get it out. I know it's a crocodile elf detective, but like, God, I love Simic. I miss Simic cards so much. Card's pretty cool. It's a little like it's a disguised creature that flips up for 5 into a 5/5. It's if you're hitting your opponent with a 5/5 more than once, you're in really good shape. It is nice getting that first clue, but like it's mostly just fine. Cool card though. Yeah, I love Simic cards. It's a Crocodile. A dad elves like uh, all right, so up next we have the split cards. So this is technically a returning mechanic, but it doesn't feel like a mechanic, and all the cards need to be evaluated one at a time anyway, so I didn't mention it earlier. All of these split cards have hybrid mana, so like we have to look at them through a few different lenses. You play this card in every black deck and many white decks because it kills a tapped creature. The nice thing about this card is this effect, destroy target tapped creature, you usually have to weigh that against like what you're doing in an aggressive deck or what you're doing in a different stage in the game. Push doesn't clear a vigilant bomb. It doesn't clear an engine piece that your opponent just isn't attacking with. And it doesn't clear a blocker, but it's still very efficient removal. And the option to pool a big set of like pull a lot of power out of your opponent's graveyard to win the game is really good. So like this is a pretty good aggressive a card even in an aggressive deck because you can push your opponent's flyer or whatever you're trying to race if they get a greedy attack in, and then pool for a big attack on turn 6. Every black deck plays this, a lot of the white decks play it, and it's pretty low effort just because of the options you have attached to it. So I gave it a 6 with a floor of 5 and a ceiling of 6. I think this is actually the first 0 effort card we put in. Because like if you're black, you play this card, this is a black card. And all of the split cards are like that. They are all based in one color. You do not get both sides. They have had the fuse mechanic before, but you have to choose one or the other. Also, if you're collecting evidence, this is 8 evidence. Actually, I would like a rules check, but yes. All right. So, yeah, it's a solid card. It's good removal and a good late game attack. All right, Hustle and Bustle. Love this one. So, when you have a format that tends to stall out or reward playing a long game, Overrun, +2/+2, and Trample is a really powerful effect. So some green decks will play this without the Hustle, or try to splash the Hustle. They'll be happy to do that. Red plays this pretty much every time. It seems like a weird trick. It's not the best. So, all right, just running through the scenarios. If you are an aggressive deck, then you can hustle your opponent's creature, make them attack. Even if you can't block it, it still taps them down, but often you'll be able to block it with your creature. If you are a more controlling deck, you can control your attackers. Your attacks stop being about getting damage in and start being about forcing the block to use this as a removal spell. If you are a go wide green-white deck, you'll still play Bustle. Because +2/+2 and trample is just valuable in sets that tend to have stalled board states. It's a good overrun. +2/+2 and trample, 6 is a lot, but +2/+2 trample is nice, and you get to, if you're going to flip up your 6/7 with reach anyway, then Bustle uses the same amount of mana, and this is effectively a free spell. It's a cool card. I like this one. Yes, if you have the Hellion in play, you have an 8/7 with trample now too. It does give you a free Hellion flip, Fina. Yeah, I love this card. You can force an attack or a block. It's very flexible. I like this one. You have to think about how you're using this card at all points in the game. But this has a lot of weird flexibility. Because, like, if you can hustle your opponent's 2/2 on turn 2 in your blue-green collect evidence deck, you can then collect evidence 7 with this card, with this one card. Even though you only had to pay 1 mana to get it into your graveyard. Like, it has good uses in any red deck and niche uses in a lot of specific archetypes. Blue-red probably still runs this, but it's a little more awkward because blue-red really only wants the Bustle side. Love it, though. All right, Cease and Desist. This is a very cool card. So the thing is, like, 6 mana to destroy all artifacts and enchantments it's not about having targets. Your opponent will always have artifacts and enchantments that you need to kill, because every color has them, and the ones that have fewer make more clues. Wiping your opponent's clues is going to make them concede. The trick with Desist is not having artifacts and enchantments yourself. Like, white has 3 enchantments that you need to stay in play because they've got O-rings on them, and every other color makes a ton of clues. So, like, building your deck without investigation is the hard part of using Desist. Cease is relevant because you get to remove evidence, gain life, draw a card, or trigger your green-black cards twice. So this card is harder to use than the other split cards, but there's a lot of potential value here. I gave it a 3 with a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 6, but in the right deck, it's really good. And if you're in pack 2 and you're like, shit, I only have 3 cards that make clues, what am I going to do? Well, pick up a few Desists, wipe your opponent's clues. Because if you only have 1 or 2 clues, you can just crack them and then plan around desisting. And if you are a deck that makes a ton of clues, you can use Cease to cycle it. I'm raising this score. Yeah, we're bumping 2 of these up. Because it's just got, like, the worst case scenario of cycling it is so good. Sure thing, Fina. I was really glad you could hang out. It was nice to see you. Yeah, that's pretty accurate, Tyrant. Hustle is like boss's orders. Also, just 8 for evidence. Yes. Yeah, I'm bumping it up. I talked myself up because, like, it's not about how powerful it is in any deck. It's about how likely you are to include it in any deck. Like, I'll play this in a green-blue evidence deck really happily, play this in a green-black graveyard deck, play it in any green or white deck that didn't make enough clues, or that gets its card advantage elsewhere. But the thing is, like, we're going to talk about green tonight, and we'll see all the enchantments that you have to play. But, like, compared to other green-white cards, like, if you have to kill your own Insidious Roots, that's a disaster. If you have to kill your own Buried in the Garden, that's a disaster. So, like, this is work to play with, and to build around. But I convinced myself that it's worth it over the course of this speech. All right, up next, Fuss and Bother. Why do they keep, like, I keep looking at cards and it's like, oh my god, this is busted in the blue-red deck. This card is busted in the blue-red deck. Put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature. That's good. You will usually play that. You'll play that in every red-white deck. You will play this in every white deck. It's just good in every white deck because blue-white is a control deck. You'll almost always just want the Bother plus Surveil 2. It's no, like, Imperial, but Surveil is quite good. I gave it a 5 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 6. Being able to grow your whole team is awesome. Being able to make a fresh team is awesome. And this is a very good anthem. Like, If you get 3 counters out of a fuss, you're probably winning that game. And if you aren't in a game where getting 3 counters on your attack is useful, getting 3/1/1 flyers certainly will be. Flotsam and Jetsam. So I gave this one is the weakest inherently. So the Jetsam half of reanimate one of your opponent's creatures, or reanimate a spell. Like you get to cast any spell from the graveyard. It's a little tough. There's a lot of good ways to control what's in the graveyard. Blue, green, and black are very good at controlling what's in the graveyard. So you can't really Jetsam against a blue, green, or black deck and have it be as powerful as you want it. But Flotsam is really nice because milling 3 cards and investigating is good. Milling yourself is important in green, black, and blue, and difficult to do. There's only a few sources of self mill besides surveil, and you don't always want to surveil. But like milling 3 cards and investigating is worth a card, so I'm usually going to be happy to play just the Flotsam half, at least in any green or blue deck. I'm going to bump up the floor a little, but we're keeping the score the same. Yeah, that's fair, Tyrant. All right. That's it for the multicolored cards. I need to get some tea, and we'll do all the artifacts and lands, and then I'll take a 30-second break before we do the green cards. I'm going to pull the stats page up again because I think that's the most relevant. So just as a quick recap before I do that, I have revised the system somewhat. So it's mostly the same. I got rid of the old 9 and combined it with 10. So everything is on average half of a point stronger than it was before. And then I sort of categorize things. Like a 1 to 3, that's your generally filler. A 4 to 6, that's your meat and bones. A 7 to 9 is your powerful cards. And we're still not going to have a lot of 10s. I talked a little bit about the play boosters. We went through the mechanics and what they mean to the format. And this is your stats. I'll be right back. If you have questions about the set in general, or things that you might have missed, type them up now. I'll go through them all when I get back. I need more tea because my throat won't last otherwise. All right, any questions? Let me check. I almost chopped the split cards in half for this for this part, and I decided against it. Because like then they look like two different cards. Split cards are one thing that like makes sense in paper, but they have not been doing a good job of keeping the text light. Like it used to be that every split card had to have text like this, destroy artifacts and enchantments. But that's not the case anymore. All right, so we're starting on the colorless cards. First up, we have our first case. Oh, sorry. For me. I don't know who Dominic Meyer is. Did he? I don't think so. All right, so case of the Shattered Pact. This is our first case. If you missed the explanation, a case does something when it comes into play, and then each end step, there's a check to see if it's solved. So it's solved if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, and then you get an effect while it solves. So generally speaking, the initial effect is balanced against how strong the solved effect is. So case of the Shattered Pact, 2 colors. Oh shoot, is Build Pact shattered? Case of the Shattered Pact comes into play. Go get a basic land card, put it into your hand, and shuffle. That's not good unless you need the basic land. To solve, there are 5 colors among permanents you control. That's a tall order. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains flying, double strike, and vigilance. So solving it is really cool. This is a very cool build around. The thing that is not immediately obvious about the case of the Shattered Pact is that you can do this in a monocolored deck. Like, let's say I am mono blue and I want to solve the case of the Shattered Pact. It's not about having additional colors. It's about consciously drafting to solve the case. So, like, I can pick up a Granite Witness to be my white card. I can pick up a Fairy Snoop to be my black card. I can pick up a... Where's the white, black, red? I can pick up a Gadget Technician to be my red card. Like, there are enough ways at common to enable the case of the Shattered Pact that you're pretty happy with it in general. If you aren't getting the land. So, like, I'm happy to play this card if activating it is a corner case, if solving this case is a corner case, but it has to at least be possible. So, like, getting the basic land is not awful, and then the threat is tough for the rest of the game. The split color, the guild mana multicolored cards enable it, and there's a lot of little extra niche ways to enable it too. So, like, you're gonna have 2 colors for free. You can splash the third off the case of the Shattered Pact, and then run the last 2 colors off of your disguise cards. You can also like detective tokens are blue and white, and so like you can make those pretty easily in a white deck. So it's manageable, and the land is not awful on its own. I would love, if I get 2 copies of this card, I might go monocolored case of the Shattered Pact deck. Like, the thing is, two colorless mana to go get a basic land is very close to good enough. It's not, but it's close enough that you can make it. You can make it work. All right, up next we have Gravestone Strider. So this is a cool one. I actually revised this one a lot. And I settled on a 4. 4 is the highest score I've given a card like this. The thing is, a 2 mana 1/3 is better in this set than it's been in a bit because it can block disguised creatures. Like, it means that if your opponent is on the play and you're on the draw, you're happier to have 2 mana 1/3s because they let you block your opponent's most likely 3 mana 2/2. It's a bit of a risk because there's a good chance that they just turn it up and kill your creature. But surprisingly, your opponent's 3 mana disguise creatures are not very likely to be able to turn face up and kill the Gravestone Strider on turn 4. Most of them have to do it on turn 5, or they can do it and they trade with the Gravestone Strider, or they do it and it's still a 2/2 and they just bounce off. The thing is, Exiling Gravestone Strider from your graveyard on the second ability is a cost, and you can target your opponent's cards that they might recur. You can target their opponent's cards that they might use to collect evidence, or you can target your own creature card, and you'll get 2 triggers on stuff like Insidious Plants. So cards like Insidious Plants only trigger once whenever a creature leaves your graveyard. It says 1 or more. So if you collect evidence 16 and exile your whole graveyard, you still only get 1 trigger. But if you use the Gargoyle, you get you get a trigger on the activation because exiling is a cost, and then you get a trigger on the resolution because that is a separate ability. So this is good when you need to splash, and it's good in black-green, but it's going to be worse than a lot of your 2-drops in general. It's just not as bad as it looks. It enables splashes pretty well, and it's nice colorless fixing with additional value in the late game. That's right, Shimi. It can absolutely do that. Like, the splash you get on it is useful. That no part of this card is the best at what it does. So you want to get multiple cards of value out of this card. I'm going to lower the floor a bit, but we're keeping the regular score. So, like, if you are a plant deck that is splashing cards, then you want this card. And it's going to be a really useful thing to have access to out of your sideboard in a best of 3 games. It's a really well designed one. I love it. All right, up next, Lumbering Laundry. Card's fine, low effort. You're pretty happy to look at your opponent's face down creatures, but like the fact is, this is just going to be worse than your other disguise cards, worse than other 5-drops, and just more fragile than other 5-drops. You don't gain anything for this being an artifact except fragility, so it's always just going to be fine. You'll play it some of the time, but you will always have better options. Yes, 4/5 is chonky, but the 5-drops in this set are really good. Every color has a 5-drop it wants most, and it's not Lumbering Laundry. Like, you will end up playing it because you need the disguise creature. You will end up playing it because you need the 5-drop, but you're never going to be happy about it. This is a really good point, Ben. This is why you do the laundry. All right, Magnetic Snuffler. This is the 5-mana artifact that I want compared to Lumbering Laundry. So we haven't talked about them yet, but every single color has a clue equipment, which means that if your deck has equipment in it, you can get that equipment into the graveyard. However, you don't need the equipment recursion portion of this card for it to be good, because it's also fine if it's a 5-mana 4/4 that grows every time you sacrifice a clue. The threat of activation is valuable. I really like the clue equipments. I think I like them more than most other content creators. I think they're very powerful and flexible, and this card works well with them. And even if you don't have a ton of equipment, you're still okay using it to activate stuff. It's a little annoying if your opponent plays a 5-mana 5/5 and you're on the draw. It's just tougher to make fit into your curve correctly. But there are 9 equipment in this set, and there's 7 at uncommon that are actively good, and all 7 uncommon ones want to be sacrificed. Yes, it is better than it looks. So, like, think of this as a 5-mana 5/5 that has the potential to draw you a card. Yeah, it's just great with normal old clues. There's a lot of artifacts that sacrifice incidentally in this set. The only awkward part of Magnetic Snuffler is there's a blue, a black, and a red card at 5 mana that also want you to sacrifice artifacts. I might lower. The thing is, it does compete with other 5-mana artifact cards, but like, I'm still pretty happy to play this card. I'm lowering the floor because I'm raising the effort. Yeah, I like that. 5, 4, 7 high. Love it. I'm gonna play this card a lot. But I will be playing this card higher than most other people because I value the clue equipment more than most other people, and I value equipment in general more than most. Magnifying glass. Like, you need a certain number of ways to investigate. You want a certain number of ways to make mana. The thing about magnifying glass in this set that makes it weak is your 3-drops, you will always have a 3-drop. Like, this effect, 3-mana mana rock, has been fine in sets with good 5-drops. But you need your turn 3. You want to be playing a disguise creature on your turn 3. But making a clue every turn, even at 4 mana, is reasonable. It has a place. There's also a card that specifically searches up the card Magnifying Glass, which is why that ceiling is a 5. You don't usually want to play it, but you will. The card's fine. Win more is accurate. That is a good way to describe it. All right, Sanitation Automaton. You need a certain amount of 2-drops. This isn't the 2-drop you want. You will play it when you need it. The Surveil is useful if you are interested in milling yourself, but like you wouldn't play 2 mana 2/1 Scry often. It is better than usual just because it's harder to punish than usual. But it is a filler 2-drop. You will play it because you need 2-drops, not because you want to play the Sanitation Automaton. Gave it a 3 with a floor of 3. It's usually going to play near that floor of a 3, ceiling of 5. The 5 is in a dedicated collect evidence deck, and I'm actually lowering the ceiling. Thinking Cap. It's a good card in the Detectives deck, bad in most other decks. Like 1 mana to play, 1 mana to equip is a good card. 1 mana to play, 3 mana equip is a bad card. And even in the dedicated Detectives deck, there are better things you will do with your mana because of clues, so you have to be a little careful with it. There's a card that searches the Detective Cap. Love the art, love the cap itself. I like the style. There are a fair number of detectives, Tashimi. I think I counted them up. There are 34 detectives in the set, as well as things that make detective tokens. But, like, it's work. It's not a free thing. Alright, cool card, but you have to be the detective set. All right, so now we're on the lands. There are 4 uncommon lands as well as 10 rare lands. You will see the 10 rare lands a lot. The 10 rare lands are all come into play tapped. When they come into play Surveil, they're all good, but they're rares. So this is a really cool magic card. It's not a great magic card, but it's a land that you can play as a creature. So this is one of the reasons that I think this is going to be an 18 land set. It is a tree in a trench coat. I will often be playing this card as my 18th land because a land that you can play as a creature is just cool. Flipping it up is essentially free because if it's been in play for a turn, you can. So you play it face down for 3. It's 3 mana to flip up. Then it generates 2 mana and taps for a mana. So like it is a disguised creature that is free to flip up. It's more like an extra disguised creature. It's also ramp. So it's free. It's a disguised creature. It's free to flip up on turn 4, and then on turn 5 you have 6 mana. There's also cards that reduce the cost of disguise, which is cool, which can help. Like there is a place for this card, and I will take it pretty. I'm usually gonna be pretty happy with the first copy because it's an 18th land that's also a creature. Like that optionality is pretty valuable as long as it's only a 2-color deck. You have to be a little careful with colorless lands in this set because color requirements are a little intensive. Lots of cards require multiple colored mana. Oh, thank you, Lion. I did miss the rare detectives on that. Yes. So Tashimi, it's an 18 land set because so many of your cards have draw a card if you pay 2 mana attached to them. Like investigate means that you are more likely to lose from not being able to cast your spells than you are from running out of cards. And we'll talk more about the non-basic lands. Like this is a land that is a card as well. It's been a bit, but yeah, this Branch of Vidugazi, this is a cool magic card. I'll usually play it as my 18th land, but I don't want the second copy compared to like an Edgewall. Up next, we have Escape Tunnel. I tend to give Evolving Wilds in any given set a 5. This is Evolving Wilds plus you can make a creature unblockable. It's a good card. It's fixing. It's good with both colors. You will often have a turn off. And like, it's a land that is not terrible to draw in the late game. Just better Evolving Wilds gets a 6 for me. Floor of 5, that's if it's only ever in Evolving Wilds. Ceiling of 7 is when you actually care about that optionality. Public Thoroughfare. So this is a set that's going to have some controlling options. This is a pretty controlling card. It's reasonable for splashing. It does have diminishing returns because If you have a hand with 3 copies of this card, you can't play any of them. And if you have, but compared to this card in the past, we've seen this kind of card in the past, even in Ravnica as Gates. It'll come into play tapped, and you have to pay a mana or sacrifice it. Being able to tap a clue instead of playing a mana does make this a lot better in this right deck. So like this doesn't fit into any specific archetype, but it gets better the more cheap cards you have that make clues. And we'll see a lot of 1 and 2 mana cards that make clues, which make this card pretty good. Because it is artifact or land. So sometimes you're going to play this on turn 2. That's not going to feel great. But when you play it on turn 3 or turn 4 and it makes any color, it's nice. You do have to, don't play this in your 2-color deck, but like a lot of the turn 3 or more controlling decks with splashes do want this card. The thing is, Tashimi, like you don't use it, you don't want it just when you're desperate for splashing. You're going to want it when you have, like, it enables splashes in more controlling late game decks. And it's going to be inherently better when your deck has 18 lands. All right, Scene of the Crime. Now, this one's really good. It's a doozy. Like, you can tap it for mana to sacrifice itself to draw a card. It is an artifact land, so like you play it in your blue-red deck, and it's not hard to turn your clue into a mana of any color. Also, clues don't have to tap to sacrifice. So if you are tapping clues to make mana, you can still sacrifice them later. It's not like food. It is a clue land. It is an artifact land dash clue. Card is really good. If you don't know what to take out of this pack and this card is in it, take this card. It's very good. You'll be happy to play 3 of them. I'll play this card. Like, if I have 3 or 4 copies of this card, I'll play 19 lands. Like, you just cycle it when you're done with it. Because, again, it can tap itself to cycle. Very, just really powerful land. I'm actually upping the score because it is just better than the Escape Tunnel. I gave the Escape Tunnel a 6. Yeah, card's really good. Very powerful land. Like, I'll take it over cards. I will take it over cards that are good for my deck or removal. I won't take it over like a linchpin for my deck. And I'll first pick this. If you won't see me first pick, if I'm trying to have fun and like show off some new cards or archetypes, I'm not gonna first pick this. But if I'm playing to win, I'm gonna first pick this card. All right. So these 4 lands, not Escape Tunnel, but these 3 lands, the common, 2 uncommon lands, really pay you off for being an 18 land deck. And since other things in this set want you to have 18 lands, then because of all the clues, I'll do it a little more often. And that is in paper and in best of 3. But in Arena, I will still usually do 17 lands with clues, just because of the hand smoother early on. Okay, so all right, just making sure we can see everything. Up next, we've got green. I'm gonna sip my tea for a few seconds, and then we'll talk about green. I haven't heard this song in a while. I only use this. I used to use this playlist every time I stream. Now I only use it for the set reviews because I want the music to come across in YouTube. When I sip my tea, I can't see my mouth. I like that emote. Where'd that emote come from? Mini Fool. All right. Do we have any questions about any of the artifact and multicolored cards, or the set overview before I move on to green? I gave all the red white multicolor cards 6s. Yeah, but Ravnica's great. Good thing, Lion. I'm glad you made it. I'll talk to you later. Get some sleep, buddy. Couldn't have done it without you this time. You really helped me out here. Yeah, these ratings feel good so far. Might end up bumping down a few of the 7s. A couple of the 5s might end up as 4s. But overall, this feels good. All right. On to green. So, green has a few things going for it. Green white. So they call it, I want to say like tokens. Like it's a go wide strategy. I've been calling it overrun. Green blue is the collect evidence deck. What it really means is that it's grinding, but the creatures that you're grinding with are so efficient compared to the past. There's a lot of cards that care about the graveyard too, which makes looting a lot better. Green blue does feel like it has its own identity here. Pretty nice. Like it's not just huge creatures. Green black, I'm calling it reverse dredge because you have to exile cards from your graveyard. And then red green is big disguises. It's just ramp, but instead of playing huge creatures, you're flipping up huge creatures. Um, the numbers matter a lot in this set. Like giving your creature +2/+2 or +3/+3, the size matters a lot in this set. So like a +1/+1 counter is a big deal. Being able to grow your creatures a little bit matters. It's a little bit like LCI. So when Lost Caverns of Ixalan, everything flew and was a 2/2. So exploring to give yourself a little extra power made a huge difference. Well, it's a lot like this is like that, but on the ground. The size of your creatures matters a lot. And if you can, for instance, figure out what your opponent has face down before you attack, you can grow your creatures accordingly to mess with their blocks. You can also use the size of your creatures and then check that against how your opponent is attacking with their disguised creatures in order to deduce what their face down creatures are. Your graveyards matter in different ways based on the cards in your deck and based on what you have to do against what your opponent is doing. Um, Controlling what is in your graveyard is a weirdly important thing that green wants to be doing. Green is great at answering artifacts and enchantments compared to other colors, and great at answering flyers. And compared to other sets, your ramp spells are more valuable. Being able to put an extra land into play is better than usual because you have more to do with your mana. Like it used to be like in other sets, you would have to weigh the number of 6 drops you have in your deck versus the number of 4 drops really carefully, because if casting your 4 drop on turn 6 with 2 untapped mana felt like such a disadvantage. It felt like you were playing green wrong. But in this set, you can use that 2 extra mana to crack a clue, or you can just play your 6 drop face down as a 3 mana spell. So like using your mana efficiently is easier with the tools you have at your disposal. So while you're drafting green, you have to keep a few questions in mind. You have to think about what you're doing with your graveyard. Think about how you're keeping a creature in play. All of green's removal and a lot of what green's doing in general requires having a creature in play already. So like, don't always make the trade. Don't always make the dangerous block in green. You have more leeway to do that in other colors. While you're drafting, think about how much you actually care. Like, if that creature aids your game plan really well, then grab it, but you might not need it to aid your game plan. It might be more important to pick up that removal spell or that answer or that way to draw cards than it is to pick up that creature because you have access to so many efficient creatures on rate. And then the last thing, green is very, very good at splashing colors in this set. So we are asking ourselves all these questions as green drafters as we're drafting, because if we are a green-blue collect evidence deck, green and blue is really good at drawing cards in this set. And green is really good at having creatures in play, so we'll probably need to splash a little for removal. Tashimi, great question. How are we winning the game? If you don't have a way to win the game in pack 3, pick one up, an off color, and then splash it. Green, so in addition to so there's not a ton of fixing in this set at Colorless, but there's good Colorless fixing, and there's a lot of good fixing in green. So pick up your missing pieces in other colors and splash it. Green is really good at splashing. Not every color is good at splashing in this set. All right, so up first we have Aftermath Analyst. 2 mana 1/3. We talked about why 2 mana 1/3s are good. They block your opponent's disguised creatures. Milling yourself is difficult to do in this set, and Aftermath Analyst is a really good way to do it. And 4 mana to return all your lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped is good in this set, even if you're only picking up 2 lands. Even if you're only picking up 1 land, that's still a nice bonus on this card. So I gave it a 5 with a floor of 4, a ceiling of 6, and medium effort. It's a little work, but not as much as you think. It does do better the more mill cards you have, but body size, I'm happy to pay 2 mana for this 2-drop. Airtight Alibi. So, in other sets, this effect would be pretty bad. I do like an enchantment that sticks around and gives +2/+2 and instant speed. So like this is a good trick. Giving 2 toughness is kind of a lot. There are not a lot of tricks compared to like LCI and other sets that you have to compete with. So I gave it a 3, and it's usually going to play near that floor of a 3. I'm actually going to go ahead and raise the ceiling to a 5 because it's a good sideboard card against the suspect decks. But suddenly being able to block with a creature that couldn't block and giving a creature hexproof is nice. If you can counter a spell, that +2/+2 sticking around is very relevant, especially if your opponent already paid 2 extra mana to make it you haven't been hearing this music at all. I'm so sorry. I can't believe the music's been off the whole time. But that's okay. You haven't needed it. The music's more for me anyway. Oh, yes, this is a good... It's a lot for a combat trick. It's a lot of mana for a combat trick. But it's not a bad combat trick. It does its job. It's fine. And you will sideboard this in pretty often. Remember that part about how am I keeping a creature in play? The answer might just be Airtight Alibi. Killer Among Us. This is my front runner for favorite card in the set right now. So like a 5 mana 3/3, 5 mana for 3/1/1s is not usually great. It's actually almost playable in this set specifically, because it's almost playable in this set specifically. Hang on 1 second. Putting on the music. All right, it's a 5 mana for 3 bodies is almost playable in this set specifically, because it yes, it is Among Us. Because green-white cares so much about going wide. However, this is a lot of text. It basically puts 3 tokens into play, and then you designate one of those 3 tokens to actually be a 4/4 with Death Touch. Really cool card. Love the way it's designed. It is also a green permanent, a white permanent, a blue permanent, and a red permanent on one single card. That is one card that generates 4 of the colors you need for Case of the Shattered Pact. You want all of the different bodies for the green-white deck, and just on rate, 5 mana for a 4/4 with Death Touch, even if it's only for 1 turn. But 5 mana for a 4/4 and 2 1/1s is a good enough rate on its own, and you can do it like your opponent has to guess what the killer is, and if they guess, like, it's so cool. So like you choose Goblin, right? And then your opponent has to guess whether, like, if your opponent has a shock in hand, they have to guess whether you chose the Goblin to be the 4/4, the Merfolk to be the 4/4, or the Human. And if your opponent has 3 blockers, they have to guess which of the creatures they need to block. Like, it's funny and it's powerful, and it is my front runner for favorite card in the whole set. It is a 1-card, 3-card Monty. Yes, I'm so excited about it. It's so cool. And the flavor's there. Oh my god, I love it so much. It's actually why this card is why I decided to review green first. Like, I read this card, I'm like, this is so funny. I want to play with this every time. I want to try and convince my opponent that the merfolk is the killer, but actually it was the goblin. The goblin is the 4/4. I also like how this did represent all 5 colors: blue, red, white, green, and then black. But black got murdered in the card murder. Oh, what a card! Just beautiful in form, function. Melvin. This is a Melvin card. Love it so much. Bite down on crime. 4 mana for a bite is bad. 2 mana for a bite is good. I meant to this for this to be a 3. Oh, my green ratings might be a little bit off, just because I had to redo them. But they're mostly good. So yeah, this is reasonable removal. You want this the most in the collect evidence deck specifically, so I'll be raising the difficulty. But a 2 mana bite good, 4 mana bite bad. Optionality on your bite. This is pretty good. You can also bites have traditionally been a very risky thing, right? Because if you bite a creature and your opponent kills it in response, you're in a lot of trouble. But this is one place where disguise is a huge boon. Because if your opponent only has a few mana available, they're not going to be able to murder your disguised creature in response because of the ward. Like, this kind of card is more powerful and consistent in a set with ward, and you have access to 50 ward creatures. So that makes it a little bit better, and you're happy to pay 2 mana for this effect late in the game. Yes, this is the green kill spell. Case of the Trampled Garden. So this is our first on-color case. 3 mana, divvy out 2 counters. When it's solved when you have total power 8 or greater, it's pretty trivial, but this is another card that cares about keeping your creatures in play. And then whenever you attack, put a +1/+1 counter on an attacking creature and it gains trample. This is a powerful card. It is a good finisher. You are happy to distribute, like 3 mana for 2 to distribute 2 +1/+1 counters is just okay. But it's an easy to solve case, and it's going to just get better and better as the game goes on. Again, pump spells are a little bit better when you have access to ward creatures. I like this case. This is a really cool one. Case of the Trampled Guardian. All right, so great question, Saunders. So solving is an end step trigger. So at the beginning of your end step, it checks and says, do my creatures have total power 8 or greater? So it's tough to solve this on turn 3 when you play it, but it's fine to just stick around until you get to 8 power. Your opponent will have a chance to kill your creature to stop you from solving it. So it cannot be solved. You cannot reap the award of solving it until your next turn. Yeah, I love it. Like, the Case of the Trampled Garden sounds like Encyclopedia Brown, and it's the kind of thing where Encyclopedia Brown would turn up and be like, oh shit, we gotta call Van Helsing. Like, it's great flavor. I think they nailed the cases because it's a complicated card type. It's not that intuitive, but there's only one in each color. So like, you can take everything on a case-by-case basis, evaluate them all separately, and it feels like you are moving through them. Like, when Wizards of the Coast said this is what a case is, they were a little bit like, when it wasn't always a good... It didn't seem like it would be intuitive or work, but then you look at the case, it works pretty well. Okay, that's why I do the VTuber thing, because I'm an immortal demon. It works out well. I mean, like, one of my favorite authors, who I've been talking about all day, Roll for Broke, is Agatha Christie. She's 100 years old. Like, her books are 100 years old, and they're still great. So, yeah. It's pretty cool. I like it a lot. So, like, this is the win condition, to answer your question from earlier. This is a good win condition for green. Growing your creature every attack, giving it trample, very valuable. All right, Chalk Outline, a true build around. It does nothing if you don't build around it. But compared to some of the we've had these engine type cards in the past, and they might say whenever a creature card leaves your graveyard, investigate, or whenever a creature leaves your graveyard, make a 2/2. This does both. Every single creature card that leaves your graveyard is worth 2 cards, and one of them is immediate. It blocks. It does everything you need it to do right that turn. One of them investigates. This is a card that I gave it a very low floor because you can't play this card unless you build around it. But I gave it a high ceiling, and I gave it a 6 because pack one, pick one. You will be able to build around it. You can make this work at common. If you have this card, you can pair it with common cards, and it will work. The amount of value you get from this is immense, but you have to build around it. Like, this is a true build around, and it is definitely worth building around. Yes. Like, we talked about some of the other cards that make this work. Like, Chalk Outline is a really good reason to take your Gravestone Strider a little bit higher, because it triggers Chalk Outline 2 times. It's not once per turn. It is once per time a creature card leaves your graveyard. But like, if you have a Gravestone Strider that has already done its job and forced your opponent to spend a card on killing it or flipped it up, then now you have 2 mana, investigate twice, put 4 power down. This is a powerful build around. Love it. Colbert Ambusher. So 5 mana, 4/5. Like, this is one you're going to be pretty happy to play just cast. This is a good disguise creature. It's almost removal, but it's not instant speed removal. But being able to just cast this, let something else attack, or flip it face up on turn 5 to kill something is useful. It's better on the play than on the draw, but I'm pretty happy with it in general. Also, the flavor text is really good. It is the bite at the end of the tunnel. So I gave it a 4. It's usually going to play like that at the close to that floor of a 4, but if you are a dedicated green ramp deck or a dedicated red-green big disguise deck, it's very powerful. It also makes all of your pump spells better. And this is a card that would have a higher value if there were more pump spells in the set. That is correct, Satchmo. But it is not... We're going to look at some cards in a bit that will show you that collecting evidence is something that you will usually be able to do with only one creature in the right deck, or only one card in the right deck. It does have to be a creature. Like, you have to build your whole deck around making Chalk Outline good, but it's worth it. And I don't say that for all the build rounds. I don't say that for all the build arounds at uncommon. Like, it's not a rare. You can get 3 Chalk Outlines. And if you're the only person playing black-green collect evidence or blue-green collect evidence, then you will get all the Chalk Outlines. The card's really good. Yeah, I like this card. It's better the more pump spells you have. It's just tough to find the pump spells, so I only gave it a 4. But if you have those, pick it up. You'll be happy with it. Oops, I skipped it. Fanatical Strength. Here's one of those pump spells. So, we have in this set 1 spell that grants +2/+2, 1 spell that is an aura that grants +2/+2, and then Fanatical Strength grabbing +3/+3. That's it for toughness. There's a couple cards that put +1/+1 counters on it, but giving something more toughness on attack is very rare. There are only a few cards in the whole set that do it. We saw Staggering Size be an overperformer in LCI because your size mattered so much. The same is true here. Fanatical Strength is a powerful, proactive pump spell, and it counters a lot of the +3/+3 spells. Like, there is more unconditional instant speed removal in this set than LCI, but there's fewer pump spells. So this ends up being a stronger pump spell just due to the lack of this effect in this set. Like, most of the instant speed combat tricks and pump spells are replaced by flipping a creature face up. Yeah, so this card is better than it looks. You still have to be a little careful because green needs a critical mass of creatures. You need a lot of creatures in your green deck. But pretty much all of your... If all of your cards that aren't creatures are Fanatical Strengths and fight spells or bite spells, you'll be pretty happy. So yeah, I gave it a 4, ceiling of 5. It's usually going to play around that 4, and it has diminishing returns. Flourishing Bloomkin. This card is cool. It really wants you to be green. It does not have to get basic forests. And there is a cycle of Surveil lands at rare that a lot of people aren't going to want that this card can get. This card is best when you can play it as a 2-mana 2/2. But if you flip it face up, so like let's say you're a green-white deck and you have 3 forests in play when you flip this up, because it's 5 mana to flip up. 5 mana to flip up is a lot. But then it goes to... your lands are still relevant in the late game. So, like, paying 5 mana to flip this card up is not a huge problem. If you are in a mono green deck or a mostly green deck somehow, which is not impossible in this set, gets a lot better. Like, this card is a reason to be a mono green deck. Because if you play it as a 2 mana 2/2 that grows every turn, you'll win the game. And if you can flip this face up as a 5 mana 5/5 that becomes a 6/6 because you're searching out a forest, you're going to win the game. It is 2 cards. You get 2 cards out of this. And yes, they're both lands, but when you are able to crack clues for so many cards, card's very powerful. Also, it's a plant, which matters for the black-green plant card. Cool card, more constructed than limited, but you can build around it very effectively. Also, we covered it earlier, but there are more uncommons than usual in it. Like, on average, there's going to be 4 uncommons per pack. So, instead of 3 uncommons per pack. That's a pretty big bump. Like, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you are the only person who wants Chalk Outlines, or the only person who wants Flourishing Bloomkin, there's, on average, 1 fewer card per pack and 1 more uncommon per pack. And yes, they can be things like list cards, but when there's, on average, 1 more uncommon per pack, that is, on average, 24 more uncommons seen per draft. And when 24 more uncommons are seen, and there's an uncommon that only 1 player at the table wants, you're going to get it. Which means if I want to be a mono-green Flourishing Bloomkin deck, or a green X Chalk Outline deck, and I'm the only person at the player with the ability to be that player, it's going to work significantly more often. Think like trying to be a Wingmantle Chaplain deck in Dominaria United. You're just a lot more likely to see Wingmantle Chaplains if you're the only person who wants that card. Yes, because Morph does not use the stack. Disguise doesn't use the stack. So what'll happen is you'll flip this up. Its power becomes equal to the number of forests you control as a state-based effect. Its power doesn't go on, like, it doesn't trigger anything. So the ability won't be able to go on the stack in time to save it. Or rather, it goes on the stack at the same time its toughness gets set to 0. And so people say that a lot. Morph doesn't use the stack. Disguise doesn't use the stack. And that doesn't mean, like, the only way that matters is in this situation where you're trying to get a forest, or if your opponent is trying to lightning bolt your creature. So if you have a creature, hang on, let's grab a disguise creature to talk about this. Here. So if I have this creature face down, disguise doesn't use the stack, means that your opponent cannot lightning helix your face down creature in response to you flipping up. That's all that means. This ability still goes in the stack and can still be responded to, but the toughness change does not. It's a lot of words that don't mean a lot. All right, but really good question. Thank you, Saunders. All right, get a leg up. Again, this card, so the reach is nice. You will always get at least +1/+1 on reach, which isn't great. If you can get this to +3/+3 in reach, it is great. And it is better because of how few of these effects there are. There are not a lot of ways to increase your toughness with instant speed tricks, so I gave it a higher rating than I would in other sets. +3/+3 in reach is great. +4/+4 in reach is great. It's best in green-white, but any deck that is good, like, there's just a lot of good, powerful ways to put a lot of cards into play, and there's a lot of reasons to leave mana up. So I think it was a conscious decision from Wizards of the Coast to make combat tricks that would save your creatures from burn spells less common because of how often you'll be holding up 2 mana anyway. So if I'm holding up 2 mana for a clue, I'm going to have that mana available anyway because I'm going to crack the clue on my opponent's end step for cards that get a leg up. Combat tricks are inherently better in this set, and there are fewer of them. So, cool card, I like it. Take it a little higher than you would in other sets because you aren't going to be, like, in the last set, combat tricks were very good. You wanted them in your deck, you wanted a lot of them, but you could get the last pick acrobatically. It was fine waiting on it. You aren't going to be able to wait on them quite as often. Specifically, combat tricks that increase toughness. There's a lot of weird combat tricks in this set. There's only like 4 or 5 that increase toughness, and they all take some work. Up next, we have Giant Weaver. 7 is a little bit more than we'd like. So, like, this is a 7 mana 6/6 reach. At its worst, this is a 7 mana 6/6 reach that gains 6 life. That does stabilize you pretty well. Your opponent can still just kill it. But in the event that your opponent is the kind of deck that runs a pile of murders, you just divvy the counters differently. Like, you're fine playing a 7 mana 3/3 that puts 3 counters elsewhere, and your opponent can still kill it. So, like, this is pretty good for a 7-drop. You're limited on how many 7-drops you can play, but if you are... says, I am stable. You cannot kill me next turn now. I gained all my life, I get to block with it, and you're going to have to kill this before you can do anything anyway. Like, it's not amazing because it's 7 mana, but it has a play. It has a place, and you will play it a reasonable amount of the time. Alright, Greenbelt Radical. Now, this is a card with some modes. So, a 3 mana 2/2 with Ward is just okay, but a 4 mana 4/4 is good enough. Like, you will be happy to play a 4 mana 4/4 often in this set. And then you can also play it as a 3 mana 2/2 that eventually wins the game. Like, there's a ton of good go wide strategies in this format, and putting a +1/+1 counter on every creature is great. This flips up as a 5/5. Like, it permanently grows the team and attacks. So I gave it a low effort because, like, you don't really have to play you don't have to build your deck around this card. You don't have to plan your turns around this card. You just play it wherever it fits into your curve in that given game. So yeah, I gave it a 5 for a 5, ceiling of 5. It's almost always going to play well. It's always going to be good. It's always going to be strong. Yeah, I like it a lot. Something about, like, we don't see centaurs using the height they gain very often. I like seeing that. Alright, hard-hitting question. 1 mana removal spell is good. That's it. It kills a planeswalker, which is nice. There's not a lot of planeswalkers. It is also a citizen. Relevant typing. Thank you, Asparagus. Yeah. Just reasonable removal. Like, you gotta take this pretty high if you're green, because green doesn't have a ton of removal. You don't need a ton of removal, but you're still going to take this card if you are green, because it kills things. This is another reason you have to keep your creatures alive, because compared to the other reasons you have to keep your creatures alive, you will usually be able to play a creature and this in the same turn. It's nice. It's a good card. Also, when you're drawing a lot of cards, cheap removal is much better. And there's not a lot of cheap removal in this set. It's like this and Shock. Hedge Whisperer. Very good in the detective. Like, this is a good card in the collect evidence deck because it can keep collecting evidence, and making something a 5/5 and attacking with it is good. It's not good if you're not the collect evidence deck, so I'm lowering the floor. I meant to lower the floor. I'm confident in these ratings. I'm not confident in my floors and ceilings because I had to redo everything from memory. But yeah, this is a collect evidence card. It is just okay otherwise. Like, a 1 mana 0/3 is okay in a format where Disguise is legal, but it's dangerous to block with it more than once because they can attack on turn 4, but after that, it's very likely that they can flip up and kill your creature. Yeah, if you're not milling yourself, I wouldn't play it. If you're milling yourself, it's quite good. Loxodon Eavesdropper. Wow, how far have we come that a 4 mana 3/3 Investigate is just okay? Like, this card is good. It is 2 cards. It is a 4 mana 3/3 that is worth 2 cards, even if it takes a bit. Being able to be a 4/4 attacker is really good. The more clues you make, the stronger it gets. I'm actually going to go ahead and bump this up. But, like, you don't... It's not free to... There's not a lot of good ways, free ways to draw your second card. So, like, think of it as an activated ability. It's 2 mana, draw a card, gets +1/+1 in Vigilance until end of turn. You can also activate on your opponent's turn to survive a Lightning Helix if you have 2 clues, which I like a lot about it. But yeah, usually you're just going to play as a 4 mana 3/3 that's worth the second card. You will take it and play a lot of... Well, I just read the flavor text for the first time. Thank you, Thane. But yeah, you will take it pretty high, but 4s are contested in this format. So, like, you will often take cards you need over this. I feel like I'm going to end up bumping this up, so I'm going to give it a revisit. But I do like this card a lot. Like, it's a good role player, and you'll play it in most green decks. It's only awkward because of how many 4 mana 4/4s there are. So, like, if your opponent plays a 4 mana 4/4 and you play a 4 mana 3/3 that investigates, you're not going to be able to block, but you do need a critical mass of card advantage. So it's pretty cool. So he's not stealthy, Tashimi. He is an eavesdropper, but, like, he can just hear from far away. So, like, this waitress, she's probably got to get up close to here. And every time she gets close to deliver the drinks, they stop talking. but all he has to do is sit at a few tables over and listen. I like it. I like the detectives a lot. All right, Nervous Gardener. This is one of the better green commons. Like, just being able to flip, like, sometimes you'll play as a 2-mana 2/2, but like, this is as close as flip me up for 1 mana, draw a card as we have in this. Like, getting any land is nice. This is one of the reasons, like, you're going to take this pretty high when you're green, and this is one of the reasons green is so good at splashing. Like, I gave it a 5 with a floor of 4, but it's usually going to play at that ceiling of a 5. It's usually going to trade with another 2/2 and get you a land card. Do note, it doesn't have to get a basic land, it just has to get a land with a basic land type. So, like, so often you'll play this on turn 4. So, like, this card meaning a 1 mana to flip up card has to exist in this format for Disguise to be interesting. So, like, let's say your opponent is a green deck and they play a turn 3 Disguise creature and a turn 4 Disguise creature. It's way more likely that their turn 4 Disguise creature is a Nervous Gardener and their turn 3 Disguise creature is the big creature. Like, you have to logic it out, because they're going to want to be able to flip this up the turn they play it, because if they play it and they can't flip it up, so like if your opponent has a Blitz Hellion, the 6/7, they're going to play that on turn 3, and they're going to play the Nervous Gardener on turn 4, because they want to be able to flip this up in response to the removal spell or after the block. Also, you should do that too. It's very cool. It's so cool. That is really true, Thane. Yeah, I love this card. I don't know if there's another 1 mana flip up creature, but I'll find out soon enough. Pick your poison. So this is 1 mana. Your opponent sacrifices an enchantment. Your opponent sacrifices a creature with flying, or your opponent sacrifices a clue. So like, you will always have something to hit, but you don't want to spend a card to kill a clue. So sacrificing a creature with flying is pretty good, but like, this card is fascinating in this set, right? Because if your opponent is a Thopter deck, it's bad. Your opponent is always going to be able to sacrifice a Thopter or a clue. There are a lot of good enchantments that are worth sacrificing, and like, sometimes your opponent will have an artifact, an enchantment, and a creature with flying, and you're not going to want to play this card still. But always having a target makes it relevant, and being able to kill a flyer makes it relevant. I'm going to be taking this card pretty high anytime I can sideboard it, but like, it's funny that this kind of card historically has been bad because I'm gonna sneeze. This card has been a sideboard card in the past because your opponent will often just not have any of these. In this set, your opponent is going to have too many of them every time. So if this were destroy, like, this is a set where I would play destroy, like a Crushing Canopy. I would always play destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying for 3 mana in this set. Which there is a card in white, which I think is very good, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But the fact that they get to choose makes it a little worse. I'm lowering the rating on this to a 3 because of that. But like, it is a great sideboard card, and I will often... So you're still going to main deck this if your deck is good enough at drawing cards, because it is 1 mana, deal with something every time. Like, if your deck is good at drawing cards, if your deck is good at making clues, maybe you are a collect evidence deck that is really good at investigating, or a chalk outline deck that is really good at investigating. When you are turning lots of clues into fresh cards, you need 1 mana answers, even if they're not the best answers. So I like this a lot in the clues deck, and I like it a lot in a sideboard. In best of 1, I'll play it if I'm drawing enough cards as 1 mana interaction. There's a lot of good hits on it, but they're not... Yeah, there will always be a hit with it, but your opponent will usually have enough that they can choose. Thank you. All right, Pompous Gadabout. What a card! Stand aside, nobodies. So this is a cool mini game. This is a card that I would not play until you know. I'm keeping the 5. Don't attack with this card if you aren't good at figuring out what creatures your opponent has face down. Your opponent cannot block with a disguised creature, but they can flip up a disguised creature to block, and there's a lot that they're happy to block with. Like, if your opponent has 1 green open and you have a Pompous Gadabout, Maybe don't attack your opponent's Gadabout into their Nervous Gardener that gets them a land and then trades with your 4-2. But, oops. Oh, where'd you go? There you go. Having Hexproof on your turn is very good with combat tricks. The fact that it can't be blocked by unnamed tokens or face down creatures is really cool. Exactly. Yeah, that, like, this art is amazing because they managed to create this guy. Like, look at him. He just knocked over that bucket of apples. He's very clearly an asshole, and yet you can't hate him. I can't hate him. Like, he's got this ridiculous mustache. He's got these ridiculous shoes. Like, these are not the normal shoes for the Ravnikins. He just wears these shoes. Look at everybody else's shoes. A 4-2 for 3 specifically that can't be blocked by your opponent's face down creatures. It's solid. Like, you do have to be good at figuring out what your opponent's got face down. Like, that's important. But really cool card. It's gonna play really well. It makes all your combat tricks better because your opponent can't kill it in response to your combat tricks as long as it's attacking. I like this card. Rope. I like Rope more than most people. I love a 1-mana artifact that you can crack as a clue. Like, I will play this because it's a 1-mana clue. This is a cool set of abilities. So, like, 3 to equip is a lot, but you don't bother equipping the Rope unless you really need that flying blocker or really need to stop them from double blocking. Like, these are both niche line of text, but the fact that you can cycle it when you don't need that niche line of text is awesome. It's a clue equipment. Like, sometimes you're really going to need a bigger reach blocker, and sometimes you're really going to need to force your 5/5 through their 2/2s. It also, yes, also important to note, it makes suspected creatures unblockable. So if you have a creature suspected because of a red card or a black card, then this gives them unblockable. Like, there is a mechanic in this set that is on a significant number of red cards and black cards that makes this card unblockable. So it is not hard to get a suspected creature to just win the game with the Rope. It is better than it looks because when it's not, like, it does 1, 2, 3, 4 very niche things, but when it's not doing one of those 4 niche things, it cycles. Great card. Not all the clue equipments are this good, but Rope is one of the better ones. Rebel Maverick. What a 1-drop. This is the first 1-drop we've seen that is like, oh, this is the modern standard of 1-drop. It's like, this is a 1-mana 1/1 that surveils 2. If that's all it did, we'd be happy. If it was a 1-mana 1/1 that milled 2, we would still play this card. But it leaves the graveyard on its own, triggers all of your green-black cards. Like, it surveils 2, and that +1/+1 counter is relevant. Like, this is a fantastic 1-drop. This is Green's premier 1-drop. Grab it. I gave it a 5 with a floor of a 4 and a ceiling of a 6. It's really good. Sample Collector. We're going to give this one a revisit. So this one's a little awkward. It does outsize opposing 3-drops because most of them are disguised. I'm going to go ahead and lower that ceiling and that floor. But we're keeping that 4. Just collecting evidence repeatedly. It depends. I don't know how many cards care about collecting evidence repeatedly. But, like, if you get that first attack in, like, you have to build around it a bit. That's why I gave it a high effort rating. But, like, if you go Rebel Maverick and a Sample Collector, you're pretty happy to just attack as a 3/4 and then as a 4/5. Like, a 3-mana 2/3 that grows on attack is a good card. It's all comes down to how difficult it's going to be to collect evidence on that first attack and how many cards care about collecting evidence in a repeating way. But, like, you can have curves where you go turn 1 Rebel Maverick, turn 2 Insidious Vines, turn 3 Sample Collector, and then you start enabling everything. Yes, Rebel Belt triggers plants. This card is very good in all of the green decks. Like, green-blue wants to surveil, green-black wants it to leave the graveyard. It stacks well with itself. If you have 5 of these and you surveil 2 in the graveyard, you're happy. Green-white cares about having 1-drops. And red-green is where it's kind of weak, but, like, it's fine. It's fine if it's weak in one of the 4 archetypes. Card's very good. Red-green does have a lot of rummaging too. So I'm pretty happy to rummage that away. All right, up next, Slime Against Humanity. Card's kind of bad. I'm still going to be trying very hard to make it work. I think you need 4 copies of this card, and it's bet. All right, this card is very good if you get enough self-mill. You need so many things to come together to make the Slime Against Humanity deck work, but it's going to happen. So your first copy of Slime Against Humanity is bad. That card is a 3-mana 2/2. It's a little better than usual because you can at least block your opponent's... Raising this. You can at least block your opponent's... Oh, it's because it shifted things down. Okay, when I change this number, it shifts things down. Okay, your first copy is a 2/2. Your second copy is a 3/3. Your third copy is a 4/4. You need this to be a 4/4 to be good. But if you're milling it because you have 2-mana spell, there are a few 1-mana surveil spells and a few 2-mana self-mill spells. And if you mill this, then your first copy is a 3/3, you're going to be happy. Or if you can loot one away, your first copy is a 3/3, you're going to be happy. The thing about Slime Against Humanity is you're never going to take it early. But if you get a pick 13 or 14 Slime Against Humanity, pack 1, then you can work on that. You want minimum 4 copies of this card before you can build around it. But if you can get 8 copies, that's a great deck. Yes, exactly, Thane. But like, so you need, but it's not worth doing that unless you're scaling with it. Hey, it's good to see you. So it's not worth doing that unless you're scaling with it. So like, if you have 4 copies of this card, that's like the minimum. That means that your 3-mana 2/2 isn't the end of the world, because then you can save size. Like if you're playing a 3-mana 4/4 and then you can also take that time to sacrifice a clue, you're pretty happy. So I'm going to be trying way more than I should to make this card work, but I think it's pretty good. It's inherently limited because if, like, let's say this card turns out to be great, is it going to immediately become bad because people are going to fight for it? But I'll play if I can get 4 copies of this card. It's hard to get 4 copies of this card because we have 1 fewer card per pack now and fewer commons per pack. But like, you know, it'll happen. I'll get a pick 13 or 14 Slime Against Humanity and pivot into this. Happily. Yes, it is great collect evidence. They went this way. All right, go get a basic land, investigate for 3 mana. Traditionally pretty weak. In this set, the ramp is good. You want that basic land because of cards like investigate. So like if you play They Went This Way, you will be able to sacrifice more clues. You will be able to use that mana a little bit more often. Green also really wants to fix. They gave it a 5, which is way more than I usually give a 3-mana ramp spell, but it's a 3-mana ramp spell that investigates. Card's very good. That's all I have to say about it. I gave it a 5 for a 4. Ceiling of 6 is usually going to play around a 5. That ceiling of a 6 is when you need to fix. When you are trying to get that missing color for that mythic rare, you'll be pretty happy to have They Went This Way, and you'll pick it a little higher. Topiary Panther. Solid piece of fixing. It is one of the most efficient ways to collect evidence. You can basic land cycle it and then collect evidence 6 with this guy. Think of it like Tanuki. Like, you don't... There are better functionally kicker cards in this set. Like, there are better cards in this set than the Topiary Panther to play at different stages of the game. But being able to discard this card to go get a basic land and reanimate it, or discard this card to go get a basic land and exile it, like getting the creature into your graveyard is valuable in this set. You don't play this card unless you both need to fix your colors and need to get a creature into your graveyard, either to exile it or to collect evidence with it. But that'll happen a reasonable amount of the time. That'll happen about half the time in your green deck. So like I gave it a 4 with a 4 of 3 and a ceiling of 6. That ceiling of 6 is only if you are using that body for a bunch of different things. But you can use this Topiary Panther for a bunch of different things. I also love this card. Like, it's pretty. It's a cute plant cat. I like your cat emote, Ben. All right, 3 cards left, and then we're done for the night. Up next, we have Tunnel Tipster. This is one of the better green commons. I gave it a 6 because a 2-mana dork is 2-mana ramp is way better in this set than 3-mana ramp. because 3 mana is just more likely to have a body there. You are so much more likely to have a disguised creature on turn 3. But being able to play a Tunnel Tipster on turn 2 and then a disguised creature on turn 3 is fantastic, especially because there are creatures that flip up for 1 green mana. And then this, like, a mana dork that grows over time is very strong. And it gets weaker later in the game, but that's okay. It does fall off quite hard in the late. I'm going to drop it to a 5. But yeah, if you can get it, we're dropping the floor and the middle of it. But this card is really good. It's a powerful dork. There's a lot of good things to do at 4 mana, and you don't always want to skip 4 mana, but if you... So, like, the difficult part of mana dorks, of evaluating mana dorks in any given set, is what are you missing out on by playing it? So, like, if we look at, like, Wilds of Eldraine had Utopia Sprawl. That was a very powerful card because it lets you skip your 2 mana spells and go straight to the 3 mana spells. But Root Rider Farm was a little bit weaker because it did let you fix your mana, so it was good for coloring. But you didn't want to skip your 3 mana spells because your 3 drops were so good. In this set, this is like a ramp spell to 5 mana because you play it on turn 2, and then you don't really want to miss your 3 mana spell. Your 3 mana spells are very important in this set. But if your 3 mana spell is a disguised creature, then you get to attack with Tunnel Tipster as a 2 mana 2/2 on turn 3. And if you don't have a disguised creature, well, you just play your regular old 4-drop. So being like that, if you have a disguised creature, you play it on turn 3, and then it doesn't attack as a 2. Sorry, you don't get the counter until the end step. That was me reading this card wrong. You don't get to attack for 2 mana on turn 3. That does make it a little worse, but it doesn't affect the rating. But you do get to have 5 mana on turn 4, which is pretty valuable. Yeah, it's a good card. You're also very likely to be able to play your 3 mana disguised creature on turn 4 and flip it up in the same turn with the Tunnel Tipster. I like it a lot. Oh, heck yeah, Foos! I'm glad you're here now. This set's a doozy. It's really cool, though. All right, up next we have Vengeful Creeper. Card is very good because if this card were just a split card that was play a 3 mana 2/2 or a 5 mana 5/5, it would be really good. Like, we'd play it, it would be a 5. The destroying an artifact or enchantment is gravy. It's pretty nice too. It's very likely to be a 2-for-1 when you flip it face up. Like, you can play it as a 1-for-1 5 mana 5/5. That's solid in the set. A 5 mana 5/5 is pretty good. But being able to flip it up to even, like, compared to the other spell, if you're killing a clue with this and outsizing a creature, you're happy. If your opponent blocks this with a 4/4 and you flip it up, destroy target clue, destroy your opponent's 4/4, that's a 2-for-1. That's a good card. Card is good. There's not a lot to say about it. Like, you'll play most copies of this, and you will usually replace existing disguised creatures with Vengeful Creeper. Like, it's not even a sideboard card. We talked earlier, there's always artifact and enchantment targets. There's just usually more than it's worth dealing with. And it's usually just a clue. So, like, when you evaluate disenchants in this set, you do have to think about, am I okay spending a disenchant to kill a clue? With the Vengeful Creeper, you are okay spending a disenchant to kill a clue. You can also use it to kind of check your opponent's face down creatures. So, like, just imaginary scenario, if it's my opponent's turn and I have 6 mana up and they pass with 4 mana up and they have a clue in play and I destroy target clue, if they crack that clue in response, they are not interested in flipping up that face down creature. So deducing out what your opponent's face down creatures are very... it's not worth a full card, but it's something I'm going to point out when I see it. If you can catch my early drafts of this set, I will do my best to import everything I know to you about deducing what your opponent's instant spells are, because they're all different in this set, and deducing what your opponent's disguised creatures are. And I'm so excited about that part. Alright, last card for the day. Vidugazi Inspector. It's a 2 mana 1/3 with reach. We talked earlier about how 2 mana 1/3 with reach is almost good enough in this set. You do want the option of collecting evidence with this card. Like, you play this on turn 2 when you need a blocker, and it's not a dead card off the top. You only really want it in a dedicated collect evidence deck. And, like, it doesn't pull you into a collect evidence deck, but if you end up in a collect evidence deck, or a deck that cares about exiling cards from your graveyard, you'll pick it up later pretty happily. Like, it's only awkward because, like, if you look at, like, let's say you have a 3 or a 4 mana spell that wants to collect evidence 6, then you run the Topiary Panther because you can basic land cycling it and then collect evidence 6 the following turn. But, like, it's really awkward to go get your land on turn 2 and then play a 2-drop that is a 2/3, 2/4 with reach that gains you 2 life at the cost of that Topiary Panther in your graveyard. So, like, it's a little weak, but it's not terrible. It is good actively in the Collect Evidence deck, but I'd say it's only good in the Collect Evidence deck, or as a sideboard card to shut down aggressive decks. Very good against aggressive decks. Wow, it does always feel like you just talked for 3 hours without stopping, which I guess I did. Wow, my lips are dry. Yes, but like, you want to collect like. There's a lot of 2/2 flyers, but you don't want to run the Vitu-Ghazi Inspector to deal with flyers unless you can collect that evidence, right? Like, there's a 2/1 flyer, but that's about it. There's a few 2/1 flyers. Like, it does stop them. It's a reasonable sideboard card against specific cards. But, like, a sideboard card that you don't want to main deck is a 3. It is really good in the Collect Evidence deck. Like, it is actively strong in that deck. Or when you care about exiling creatures from your graveyard. Whew. Alright, that is going to do it for tonight. That is all I have the bandwidth for. I will try and get a schedule out tonight. It might not be out until tomorrow morning. But here's what I know is on the schedule. Tomorrow night, we are going to cover as much of the rest of the commons and uncommons as we can. That's okay, Tashimi. It's all going to be uploaded tomorrow as well. So tomorrow we are doing red, white, blue, and black commons and uncommons. As many of them as I can. If I can't do them all, I do apologize. If I don't feel like I can do them all at the end of the second color, we will stop after 2 colors. What I would like to do this week is all the commons and uncommons tomorrow, all of the rares on Wednesday, then have a primer up for you on Friday. I will do my best to make that happen. I would like to get a primer up for you on our new website this Friday. And I will be updating the ratings once they're on the website every week. Pretty excited about it. But yeah, catch me tomorrow at 6 p.m. It's probably gonna be 7 p.m. Plan for 7 p.m. I'll get a schedule out tomorrow. But it's gonna be a lot of just, this is what we're doing. MTG Nerd Girl is doing a set review for EDH. Why don't we go see Jaffer? I haven't seen Jaffer in a while. I like the song. Alright, that's gonna be it for tonight. I will see everybody tomorrow. Yeah, if you have questions, if you have requests, let me know. I like Kanan a lot, but I always feel bad going from the from like dedicated numbers to the horniest streamer I know. So yeah, let's go see Jaffer. Alright, good night everybody. We're gonna go ahead and see Jaffer. He's a friend. Be good to him. And I will see everybody tomorrow night for the rest of my set review. Yeah, tomorrow night is commons and uncommons, hopefully all of them. Wednesday night, I'm going to try and do all the rares, but I really want to get this draft primer written, so I will cut things short as needed in order to make that happen. Good night, everyone. I'll be around for a bit. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me. And thank you again, Lion. I could not have done the data without you. Thank you again, Thane, for all of your lore help and your spreadsheet help. I really appreciate all of you. Good night.